Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto has shinigami powers sealed inside. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Rahlian, link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. A very different life. Scarcely 16 hours had passed and already the council had forgotten the Yondaime. Little more than half a day had passed since the death of Konoha's greatest leader perished, vanquishing the Kyuubi no Kitsune, and the village leaders were clamoring for the son of their savior's death. Uchiha Fugaku had leaped out of his seat to the right of the Hokage's chair, pressing fists to the polished oak. Sandaime-sama, we must end the demon before it has a chance to recuperate. It is weak now, and we would be doing a great wrong to those it has already slain to let it live any longer. I put forth a motion for the execution of the Jinchuriki child on the grounds that he is a mortal threat to the existence of Konohagakure no Sado. Sarutobi Hiruzen, recently reinstated Sandaime Hokage, cradled said demon in his arms, his politician's mask concealing the rage he felt toward the first clansman of the first clan, the Uchihas. Fugaku-san, what I hold in my arms here is not the Kyuubi itself, but the prison of the Kyuubi. I would ask you to remember that there is a distinction between the prisoner and the warden manning the walls. I assure you, Naruto-kun is not in any way possessed or influenced by the demon. It matters not whether he is the prisoner or the prison. He should still be put to death. If you are correct and he is not possessed now, he could be in the future. That child is the greatest threat to this village since the Shaddai defeated Madara at the Valley of the End. If the seal were to weaken or even break, we would be asking to be annihilated. We cannot count on a miracle happening again to save us. So basically what you are saying is that you do not trust Yondaime-kun. He was a seal master and assured me moments before his death that the seal is his greatest achievement. I do not dispute that Yondaime-sama was a seal master. However, he was human and as such, was not infallible. I do not wish to risk the fate of the entire village on the skills of one man, however skilled he may be. Sarutobi turned away from the Uchiha leader to the rest of the council, who else among you believes the same? One by one, the council members voiced their opinions. I, Hyuga Hiashi, 1st clansman of Clan Hyuga 2nd Clan Uchiha's motion. I, Aburam Shibi, 1st clansman of Clan Aburam vote against the Uchiha's motion. I, Nara Shikaku, 1st clansman of Clan Nara, vote against the Uchiha's motion. I, Yamanaka Inoichi, 1st clansman of Clan Yamanaka vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I, Yakushi Seino, 1st clansman of Clan Yakushi vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I, Akamichi Chauza, 1st clansman of Clan Akamichi, vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I, Inyazuka Tsume, 1st clansman of Clan Inyazuka vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I, Ketu Nagari, 1st clansman of Clan Ketuin vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I, Akiudo Jin, 1st guildsman of the Merchants Alliance, vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I, Bunman Hakuchi, 1st councilman of the Villager Council, vote in favor of the Uchiha's motion. I see then, Sarutobi said coldly. It is well that this boy's fate is not up to you then. As the sitting Hokage, I exercise my right to name this child as a ward of the Hokage. Furthermore, I hereby classify the sealing of the Kitsune no Yauko as an S-class secret, with the death penalty to anyone who reveals it to anyone who does not have prior knowledge of it, excepting the child himself and the sitting Hokage. Order in council, etc., etc. Your word is law, Hokage-sama. Uchiha Fugaku bowed formally to him and excused himself, with 7 council members following him. Sarutobi Hiruzen sighed heavily, sinking into the plush chair behind him. Thank you for your support, he said, nodding to the 2 councilmen that remained. As an Aburam, I know that it is not what is inside one that makes a person. I assume that Shikaku-san feels the same. I voted against the Uchiha mostly because it would have been far too troublesome to deal with my wife otherwise. You never change, Shikaku-kun. Anyways, I need to find someone willing to take care of Naruto here. I do not dare to put him in the orphanage or adopt him myself. That might give Danzo's faction enough support to unseat me as Hokage. And I know that neither of your clans are politically strong enough to protect him. I don't know any civilian clan well enough to be sure that they won't turn around and cut his throat the moment he is out of sight. I need someone loyal enough to raise him properly and apolitical enough to be able to withstand the pressure that will be given. Then let me have him. The 3 men turned to face the intruder to see a purple-haired woman in a ninja mesh shirt, almost indecently short skirt and long tan trench coat. Anko-san, while it is a pleasure to see you, why would you want the burden of raising Naruto? Because he is like me. I was listening to the entire meeting and see that practically anywhere he is placed he is almost certainly going to be abused. I can raise him to be a competent shinobi when he comes of age. Also, the entire civilian population is terrified of me, almost without exception, and most of the shinobi population is wary of me, so he will be protected from them that way. My place is big enough to house another person, and my salary as a Takebetsu Jounin is sufficient to support us both. Sarutobi was impressed by the 18-year-old's speech. It was the most serious he had seen her since she was abandoned by his student 5 years ago. Leaning back, he considered her offer as the two clan heads left the room. She was certainly one of the strongest Dakibetsu jounin in the village. With her temper, he almost pitied anyone who would mess with her and Naruto, assuming that she didn't kill the boy out of temper. He had 2 sons himself and knew quite well the stress that an infant could generate. Plus, raising the boy would do her as much good for herself as Naruto. Alright. I appoint you the boy's legal guardian. Since Minato's relationship with Kushina was kept a secret, let him keep his mother's surname until he is old enough to learn of his lineage. Hiruzen handed the newly christened Uzumaki Naruto to Anko. Thank you Hokage-sama. I will do my best. The Sandaime let a wry smile twist his lips. I'm sure you will, Anko-san. With that she turned on her heel and left the council room with her newborn charge. 2 weeks later, Anko was at the market shopping for baby formula. The past 2 weeks had been a living hell for the newly 19-year-old Kunoichi. She had expected to be woken up in the middle of the night to tend to the infant Naruto's needs, but this went beyond the pale. She had not slept for more than 5 hours at a time since she had brought Naruto home. Normally, she didn't sleep more than 5 hours a night anyways, but before she would at least lie on her bed and gain some rest that way. Oftentimes, when Naruto awoke it took about 2 hours to get him to go back to sleep. She spent the entire time on her feet humming and rocking the boy because he didn't like her to sit down. She swore moment her bottom touched the chair, the damnable brat started howling, as if she were taking away his favorite fox plushie. So she would pace the house, gently patting his back, listening to him gurgle in pleasure softly. Then there were the looks. Normally, she wouldn't be bothered by them, after all, she had been on the receiving end of them for the past 5 years, ever since her sensei turned traitor. It was the glares sent to her charge that got her riled up. She could understand why they hated her, to a very limited extent, but to hate an infant whose only crime was to be the son of the Hokage, although they didn't know that, was inexcusable. She ignored the whispers of the snake bitch and the demon brat. More often than not, she would place a henge on herself before going shopping for Naruto. The shopkeeper usually gave her odd looks because she would buy 30 or 40 packages of powdered formula at a time and had been asked more than once how many children she had, to be shocked to find out that she only had one. Anko visited the Hokage quite regularly, both to keep the old man updated on how Naruto was doing and to ask for advice. She had never been a mother before or even been in a serious relationship for that matter and sought the elderly Hokage for instruction on how to care for a newborn boy. She had considered more than once giving the child back to the Hokage, explaining that she just couldn't handle him, but one look at his grinning cherubic face and she would change her mind. Thanking the cashier, Anko picked up her bags in one arm, the other holding Naruto, and headed for her favorite dango joint. After last night when he absolutely refused to keep any of the formula she fed him down, she needed a stiff drink. 4 years after the day of the Kyuubi. Time to get up brat. It was 5 o'clock in the morning and Anko was in Naruto's room, flipping him out of bed. Naruto squawked noisily, flailing around, tangling himself in his blankets as he landed on the carpeted floor with a thump. Naruto sat up and blearily looked at the clock on his nightstand, reading the glowing red numbers. It's only 5 o'clock mom. Why do I have to get up so early? Because today is the first day of your ninja training. That immediately perked the 4-year-old blonde up. Really? I'm gonna start learning to be a ninja like you mom? Not if you don't get ready soon. Like that Naruto was out of the room in a flash, stripping out of his nightclothes with a lack of modesty that only the very young could achieve. Smirking, she followed her son into the bathroom, picking up the discarded sleepwear and dumping it in the hamper as she went along. 20 minutes later Anko and Naruto were outside in the darkened backyard, Naruto shivering in the early morning chill. He was wearing a bright orange t-shirt that she had sewn the Uzumaki swirl crest on and a pair of blue shorts. Alright. We are going to begin your physical conditioning today. If you want to be a ninja, you gotta be in shape. When you are good enough, we will be adding weights to your workout. But that's not for a while yet. Looking around the yard she thought for a minute. I want you to do 20 laps around the fence to warm up. After that, you will do 50 push-ups and 50 crunches. Naruto hesitated slightly at that, but took off when he saw his mother's face start to harden. The first lesson that he had ever learned was to never question his mother. He already had quite a bit of impromptu evasion training, as Anko was extremely handy with what Naruto termed the sharp and shinies. Finishing he started his push-ups, collapsing into a quivering heap after the requisite 50. Anko was on him immediately. Hey, break time ain't yet, you still got another 50 crunches to do. Rolling over onto his back, she slowly and strenuously made his way through the last 50 exercises. When he finished, he looked around for Anko, noticing that the yard was deserted. Anko's voice carried through an open window. Come on brat, breakfast is ready. Naruto brightened immediately at the mention of food. Pushing himself up on quivering legs he stumbled through the door and collapsed into his chair. Naruto looked at Anko in surprise when she set his meal down in front of him. I thought you said I wasn't supposed to have ramen for breakfast, Mom. Well, today is your first day of shinobi training, so I figured that I would cut you some slack today. Naruto eyed her suspiciously. This isn't another one of your tests, is it? Naruto had learned quickly not to take for granted anything that Anko gave him, seemingly out of the goodness of her heart. Mostly because she didn't seem to have one. Nah, she said, ruffling his already mussed-up hair, smiling gently. Just enjoy your ramen. But this is a one-time deal, she said seriously. You know what will happen if you try to break into the ramen cupboard. Naruto shuddered. Anko had booby-trapped the ramen cupboard with a few small exploding tags last month when he had tried to sneak some ramen in between meals. They weren't enough to actually harm him, but he did get slightly singed. Hi, Mom. Turning to his cooling noodles, he broke his chopsticks, gave thanks for his meal, and dug in. Anko placed a second bowl in front of him when he finished the first, and a third, and a fourth, before he sat back with a contented sigh. She let him sit there digesting for a couple minutes before she herded him back outside. Next were 50 pull-ups, using the gutter lining the house as an improvised pull-up bar. Anko had to lift him up, of course, and for a while he was too nervous to listen to her. She got his attention by throwing 3 kunai at him, deliberately missing, telling him next time she wouldn't if he did not get to work. He did 50 of those and then dropped to the ground to catch his breath. Anko was on him in a second. Whatcha doing, maggot? I didn't say you could rest yet. Back up on your feet. She grabbed the waist of his pants and hauled him to his feet. See that tree there, she asked, pointing to a 60-foot magnolia. I want you to see how high you can get as fast as you can. Naruto flashed a grin and dashed to the tree. He bounced up and caught the lowest branch. Wrapping his arms around it, he swung one of his legs over and righted himself. Balancing himself with one hand on the trunk, he shimmied up to the next branch, repeating the process until 10 minutes later, he stood with both arms wrapped tightly around the trunk, laughing exuberantly as the top of the tree swayed under his weight. Alright, enough fun, Naruto-chan, get your ass back down here on the double. Okay, Mom. He unwrapped one arm from the trunk and waved wildly, sending the tree into greater arcs, causing him to wrap his arm back around the tree, laughing again. He monkeyed his way down the tree again, splaying his arms wide with a stupid grin on his face. How'd I do? Not bad, brat. You could do better, but that is why I am here to teach you. What we are going to be working on is your physical stamina and agility and basic taijutsu. Saying that, she settled into a wide stance. Come and attack me. Naruto grinned mischievously. It was going to be a long day. 11 hours later, Literashi Anko was walking down the street with her son in tow. She had spent the entire day gauging his talents. So far, he seemed to be leaning to taijutsu and probably ninjutsu, given the stamina he had displayed today. On the flip side of that, he was probably going to suck at jinjutsu, showing very little of the mental agility to create jinjutsu. Then again, he was only 4, so who knew? Hey, Mom, where are we going? Several of the villagers scowled in her direction when they heard his voice. She had taught the villagers a long time ago not to mess with her and Naruto, but that didn't stop them from giving the pair the evil eye whenever they had the chance. We are going to dinner, Naruto-chan. Where are we having dinner? I'm hungry. Anko let a small smile curve her lips. Yes, I would imagine you would be, Naruto. Come here, she said as they reached the corner. Naruto approached her and let her pick him up, covering his eyes. Mom, I can't see now. Well, that is the idea. It's a surprise. She imagined his eyes widening in comprehension. She continued to walk for another 2 minutes before she put the young boy down on a padded stool. Naruto burst into a bright laugh when he saw where they were. Yada. Ichiraku's is the best. Hello, Tuchi-asan. The middle-aged man smiled as he saw his favorite customer. And how are you doing today, Naruto? Mom started to teach me to be a ninja today. I'm gonna be the greatest ninja ever when I grow up. Gucci grinned amusedly and looked over to his adopted mother. She was slumped over onto the counter, obviously exhausted. And how are you doing today, Anko-san? I'm fine, just tired. Gesturing to her son, she continued. Let him have as much ramen as he wants. He deserves it. Okay then. What kind of ramen do you want, Naruto-kun? Naruto thought about that for a minute, resting his chin in his palm in an almost comical fashion. Give me 3 bowls of beef ramen and 2 bowls of miso ramen. And you? The cook asked, turning back to Anko. 1 bowl of miso. Humming right up. Tucci turned to the rear of the bar. AM-chan, get 5 bowls of ramen ready for Naruto. AM appeared 3 minutes later, with a bowl of beef ramen for Naruto and miso for Anko. Anko thanked the girl and slowly set to consuming the noodles and broth. She had never expected Naruto to do as well as he had. The boy seemed to have an infinite well of energy to draw on. When he was finished with one of her tasks, he would sit down and rest for a minute, but be back up and bouncing a minute later. She would never admit this to another living soul, but she was extremely proud of her son. Tucci came back to give Naruto his final bowl of beef ramen when Anko looked up and asked him a question. "Hey Tucci-san, how was it raising Am-chan?" Tucci stopped and looked at Anko in shock. Mitarashi Anko was asking him for parenting advice. Well she was a real handful at Naruto's age. Like most children I would imagine. That's slightly comforting to know. I would never think the day would come when I got run into the ground by a 4-year-old. Children are surprising. Tell me about it. That was when Naruto's bowl clattered emptily into the stack of other bowls. Hey Tucci-asan, is my miso ramen ready yet? I'll go check Naruto-kun. Be right back. Anko let her head slump back down into her arms as the elder parent left to go get Naruto the rest of his ramen. Hey mom, does this use up one of my ramen coupons? Nah kid. This is a special treat. The ramen coupons were an idea Anko had come up with a while ago to try to limit the boy's nearly endless ramen intake. Well that and trying to get him to stop asking her if they could eat at Ichiraku's every single night. Whenever he was especially good, she rewarded him with a ramen coupon. He had to use a coupon whenever he wanted to go out to Ichiraku's to eat. She usually worked it so that he was only able to visit the stand about 3 times a week. He made the limited visits up for the volume of ramen he consumed though. He never consumed less than 4 bowls, more often eating 6 or 8. She had explained to him that a shinobi needed to have variety of food other than the various flavors of ramen found at his favorite eating joint. After he finished his last 2 bowls of ramen, she picked her now sleepy son and carried him back to her house. By the time she was unlocking the front door and disabling the traps, Naruto was sleeping soundly, drooling slightly on her shoulder. Years ago, she would have smashed the kid through a wall or 3 for doing that, but the past 4 years had smoothed some of her rough edges away. Gently she placed Naruto in his bed and tucked the blankets gently around him. She stayed there for a few minutes, sitting on the edge of his bed and softly stroking his hair. After a few minutes of that, she got up, silently closed the door and went into the kitchen. She retrieved a bottle of sake and a saucer and retreated into the family room. She poured herself some of the rice liquor and tossed it down, sighing as she felt the alcohol make its way through her system. Tomorrow she would go and see the Hokage to tell him that she was starting to train him, as well as update the old man on his general status. She picked up one of the scrolls that lined the shelf behind the couch. It was a scroll of seals. She figured that since her son was the Kyuubi container, she should try to learn about the seal that his biological father had placed on him. Of course, there wasn't going to be anything on the dead demon-consuming seal, as it was invented by the Yondaime, and it was a Kenjutsu, but there was some on the 8-trigram sealing style, which was used in conjunction with the dead demon-consuming seal, to seal the Kyuubi in Naruto. She wasn't planning on becoming a seal master, but she did want to know how the seal worked and how to strengthen or weaken it, should the need arise. Eventually she wanted Naruto to be able to use the Kyuubi's chakra as well as his own in battle, and to do that here she was. The scroll was astoundingly dry. Anko marveled that the author had managed to take a subject as interesting as sealing jutsu and make it sound boring. 3 hours later, she rolled the scroll up and put it back in its slot, heading to bed. The next morning Anko woke Naruto up at the same time as the previous day, flipping him out of bed. She started him up with his morning calisthenics. Going back inside, she hefted a training dummy outside, hoisting it on one of the branches of the magnolia that he had scaled yesterday. When he had completed the morning workout she had assigned him, she brought him over to the dummy. She versed him in the basics of taijutsu for 3 hours until Naruto's stomach rumbled loudly. Naruto grinned sheepishly. "Sorry mom. Well, we have been out here for a couple hours, so why don't we break for breakfast?" "Okay." Naruto raced inside, rifling through the bottom cupboard, deciding which cereal he wanted to have this morning. Eventually he decided on one and poured himself 4 bowls of cereal. Anko paused in amusement as she fished a box of dango from another cupboard. She figured that it was some effect of the Kyuubi sealed inside him that he ate so much. When she first adopted him, she had been slightly goggle-eyed at the grocery bill for the first few weeks. She learned from carefully spied upon conversations with other mothers that Naruto's eating habits were not the norm for anyone outside the Akamichi clan. When Naruto finished his meal, she ushered him upstairs to get a shower and change. "After all, do you want to stink when we go visit the Hokage? The Hokage's assistants probably won't let you see him if they have to pinch their noses when they see you." Naruto got undressed, put his sweaty clothes in the hamper and entered the bathroom. Anko followed him and washed his hair under the spray of the shower head. She noted that his hair was getting kindle long. She should probably give him a cut in the next week or so. When he was satisfactorily clean, she turned off the spray and wrapped a towel around his head, rubbing vigorously despite his protests. Dried off, he dressed in another orange shirt and green pants. The pair walked to the front door and Anko locked it behind them. She knelt down in front of the boy, holding her arms behind her. She could practically hear Naruto smiling as he climbed onto her back. Waiting a moment for him to latch on, she leaped to the rooftops, the wind whistling by nearly drowning Naruto's wild giggles out. When she landed in front of the Hokage tower, Naruto was gasping, adrenaline pumping through his system. When can I do that, mom? In another couple years, Naruto-kun. Right now your legs aren't strong enough to jump from roof to roof. But that is why you are training every morning now, so that you can become strong enough to do that one day. Taking his small hand in hers, she led the way to the top of the tower where the Hokage's office was situated. Greeting the receptionist, Anko and Naruto entered the old office. Sarutobi looked up from a stack of paperwork to see who had entered. The Sandaime leaned back and smiled. A visit from Anko and Naruto was always a pleasant distraction from the endless mountain of paperwork that plagued him. Well, what do I owe this pleasure, Anko-san? Well, I just wanted to let you know how Naruto has been doing. I have also started his ninja training. He shows a remarkable aptitude for taijutsu and probably ninjutsu. That is good to know. I will want weekly reports on his progress, you know. Hi Hokage-sama. Beside Anko, Naruto was fidgeting, wanting to greet the old man, but knowing if he interrupted his mother, she would be angry at him. When they both fell silent, Naruto walked up to the desk and pulled himself up so that he could see over the edge. Hello Grandpa Sarutobi. Both Anko and the Sandaime sweat dropped. Anko cursed herself. He had overheard her cussing the old man out once a while ago and had taken a liking to the name. Hiruzen sweat dropped for an entirely different reason. He was one of the top 5 ninja in the world and here was this munchkin calling him old man. Naruto was a lot like his mother in more ways than one. Hiruzen leaned forward, placing his arms on his desk. And how are you this fine morning, young man? I'm good. I had to get up early this morning to do my ninja training. It was still dark when we went outside. I see, the old man responded. I'm gonna train real hard too. Why is that, Naruto-kun? 'Cause I'm gonna be Hokage one day. Really? Then you will have to train as hard as you can. I can only pick the strongest ninja in the village to be the next Hokage. Okay Gramps. Just be ready to hand over that hat when I do. The Sandaime smiled. I look forward to the day that happens, Naruto. Get strong fast, okay? Hell yeah. 6 years after the day of the Kyuubi, Naruto was having a pleasant dream of ramen when a piercing yell interrupted his sleep. God mooning Naruto Chai. That was all the warning he received before a crushing weight drove into his midriff, divesting him of breath and throwing him out of his bed. A minute later when he had gotten his wind back and no longer felt as if he wasn't going to puke up a lung or something, he got up on his knees and glared at his mother. Damn you mom, can't you ever be a normal parent? What? And miss that priceless expression on your face. Hell no. Besides, normal is boring. Maybe if you are a psychopath, Naruto muttered, unfortunately not quietly enough. He fled his room to the backyard, where Anko took out her irritation at him by doubling his morning calisthenics. 3 hours later, an absolutely exhausted Naruto dragged himself into the kitchen. He poured himself half a dozen bowls of cereal, ignoring the smirk that Anko sent his way as she started on a carton of dango. When he finished, he sighed and headed out back to the backyard. Hold it there, short stuff. Where do you think you are going? Naruto turned to face her, confusion painted across his 6-year-old features. Aren't we going to train? Not this morning. We are going to go shopping. Shopping for what? Well, clothes for one and ninja tools for another. Naruto's face lit up the instant ninja tools were mentioned, his mind immediately leaping to kunai. His mother never let him play with any of her kunai unfortunately, saying that he did not know how to handle them properly, to which he would retort that he would if she taught him. Anko would then smile and set him to his calisthenics. Really mom? I get my own kunai? Well, duh. You are starting the Shinobi Academy tomorrow and you would look like an idiot if you didn't have your stuff. Can we go to the weapons shop first? No. Why not? He asked pouting. Because I said so, brat. Scowling and crossing his arms across his chest he sulked. Well, go get a shower and change into some clean clothes. You can't go out smelling like an armpit. The sooner you stop stinking up the house the sooner we can go. Naruto was up and out of the room in a flash, forgetting to take care of his breakfast. Anko sighed and gathered the bowls up, closing the box and putting it back where it belonged. 5 minutes later, Naruto was back downstairs, his hair still dripping. Extending an arm, she motioned for him to come closer. Mere, lem smell ya. He did, letting his mother sniff his hair, armpits and feet, giggling all the while. Come on mom. I took a shower. I don't stink like an armpit anymore. Anko took her time examining him, turning it into a game of sorts. Well I suppose you don't at that. Now you only smell like a skunk. Naruto said, drawing her name out. Alright brat. We can go now. Anko locked the door behind them and led her son to a shop in the Shinobi district whose owner she was on friendly terms with. Hey Ikitaro-san. Hey there Anko-san. What are you doing here? You don't need more ninja mesh do you? Nah. This trip is for my brat here, she said, ruffling Naruto's hair. He starts the academy tomorrow, so he needs some new clothes. I see. Well, you know where I will be if you need me. Anko waved Akitaro away and followed her son as he wandered around the store, looking at all the various articles of clothing. Spying something that he liked, he rushed off down one of the aisles. When Anko had caught up with him, he was holding up a miniature orange jumpsuit. "Hey mom, can I get this?" "Let me think," she said, putting her chin in one hand. "Hell no," she shouted. Naruto looked crestfallen. "Why not?" "1. Because that much orange will cause brain damage. 2. How the hell are you supposed to hide when you look like something that escaped from the circus?" "Well, I could use a transformation technique when I had to," Naruto said. Anko just sighed. "Just put that back, brat. I guess I gotta choose your clothes for you since you seem to be colorblind." 20 minutes later, Anko and son stood in front of the cash register with a stack of clothes. In the end, Anko had allowed Naruto to help choose his clothes. He now had half a dozen shirts in dark colors, ranging from blue and black. He also had several pair of cargo pants in black, red and one in white. Anko also grabbed some black cloths for Naruto to tie over his hair and hide the bright pigment. At Naruto's insistence, she had included an altered tan trench coat. Anko thought it was the most ridiculous looking thing in the entire store after those jumpsuits, and she let him know it. "But you wear a trench coat, mom. I am also twice your height, so it doesn't look stupid on me." Nonetheless, she bought it. Next they visited the weapons shop. The Urahara shop was a small, unassuming building deep in the Black Metal Alley, the blacksmiths and weapon makers district in Konoha. There were 2 kids out front sweeping. Well, one was sweeping and the other was slacking off. The one slacking had red hair and an annoyed expression, while his compatriot was female and had her dark hair and 2 ponytails at opposite sides of her head. The dark-haired girl bowed and greeted them in a soft tone, while the red-headed boy took an aggressive stance toward Naruto. "Hey Anko-san, who's the brat?" "What brat?" "The only brat I see here is you, Jinta-chan," emphasizing the diminutive suffix. "If by brat, however, you mean my son here, his name is Naruto." Jinta scowled at the kunoichi. "Well, I don't think there is anything in layaway for you here, so you may as well go away," Jinta said in a dismissive tone, making a shooing gesture. "Hey," Naruto said, coming out from behind Anko's legs. "The only person who is allowed to talk to my mom like that is me." Jinta turned back and leered at the shorter blonde. "What you gonna do about it, runt?" "Well, I don't think I am going to do anything, but that guy probably will," Naruto replied, pointing to the towering figure with square glasses and a handlebar mustache behind Jinta. Jinta froze, slowly turning to face the smoldering figure of Tsukubishi Tessai. Tessai bent down and grabbed Jinta by the nape of his neck, hauling him up the 30 or so feet it took for the man to straighten, lecturing the sulking Jinta about how customers were to be treated. Anko smirked and gave Naruto a pat on the head, smiling at him when he looked up at her. Tessai ushered the pair into the store proper as he set Jinta and Ururu back to chores. Urahara Kisuke wandered up to the front of the store. "Well, hello Anko-san. It's been a while." "Yeah, it has. I haven't had many missions recently. Mostly because of the brat here," she said, gesturing to Naruto. "We're here to get my son supplies for the academy. He starts it tomorrow." "Well then. Let's get started, shall we, Naruto-kun?" Naruto nodded vigorously. 20 minutes later, Naruto was staring at the pile of shaped and sharpened steel in front of him. There were 20 kunai and 40 shuriken and 2 weapon pouches. There was a roll of ninja wire and a shirt of ninja mesh, basically a finely crafted shirt of chainmail. At a distance it looked just like fish netting, but upon closer inspection, one discovered that it was not woven of cloth but steel. Also, there were 4 steel bracelets with 4 iron nuggets inset in them, each one inscribed with the number 10. Anko wouldn't tell him what the bracelets were for, saying that he would find out at home during training. Finally, Anko had purchased a pair of bracers and greaves. The bracers and greaves were made of thin steel made more durable than normal by a special process that infused chakra into the material. The armor was padded with leather on the underside to protect against chafing. The bracers were hexagonal, the circle of steel shaped into 6 planes. The greaves were fashioned in a similar manner, being about twice as thick as the bracers. As Naruto followed Anko home, he was on cloud 9. He had his ninja tools, weapon pouches weighing his pants down, the ninja mesh shirt cold against his skin, bracers strapped on under his sleeves and greaves over his pants from knee to ankle, leaving about 3 inches of pants to cover his feet and the odd bracelets in a bag in his hand. He could hardly stop himself from racing on ahead, eager to get home and try out his new equipment. When the pair reached the house, Naruto was quivering with restrained energy. Anko sighed. The way he was now, he would be up all night most likely unless she really tired him out. She forced him to sit down and eat some lunch before allowing him to escape to the backyard. "Alright Naruto. I bet you want to try out your new kunai and shuriken." Naruto nodded madly. "Well, that sucks, cause we ain't working with weapons today. Instead, I will show you what these are for," Anko announced, holding the bracelets up. "These are chakra weight bracelets. Basically, what these things will do is improve your physical strength and overall stamina. You are going to be wearing these 24/7 from now on when you are training, eating, sleeping, even at school. However, you are not to tell anyone that you are wearing these. Why not, mom? Well, would you tell an enemy all the ninjutsu you were going to use in a battle? No. Well, this is basically the same thing. Well, they are your classmates and one day fellow shinobi, that doesn't mean that you should let them know everything about you. In fact, that brings me to my second thing. You know that you enter the academy tomorrow. As such, I am going to give you your first mission. You are not to tell anybody what I am about to tell you, okay? She waited for Naruto's solemn nod before continuing. What is a ninja's greatest asset? His mind, Naruto answered without pause. And what is his greatest tool? Deception, he said without missing a beat. So what you are going to do is practice using those two things for the next 6 years. Your teachers will tell you that you should do your best, but you aren't going to do that. In fact, you are going to do the opposite. You are going to be the dead last of your class. You are going to suck at taijutsu, ninjutsu, and jinjutsu. Your weapon skills are going to be horrible. Your theoretical knowledge is going to be non-existent. You are going to do as poorly as possible while not flunking out, okay? Why, mom? If I am better than the other kids, why shouldn't I show it? Because if you do horribly in school, everyone you fight is going to underestimate you when you fight them. Because they underestimate you, it will be easier to beat them later. Naruto had a contemplative expression on his face, as if he were working through the logic of what she had said. Okay, I think I can do that, mom. That's a good kid, she said, ruffling his hair. Now, let's put your weights on. The next day Anko was crouched in a tree outside Naruto's classroom, a ball next to her. Inside, Yamino Iruka was addressing the class. Alright, when I call your name raise your hand to let me know that you are here. Aburame Shino. A boy in a grey coat and shades raised his hand. Akamichi Choji. An extremely fat boy who was working on a bag of chips raised his hand. So it went on until Iruka reached the last name on the list. Uzumaki Naruto. No one raised their hand. Uzumaki Naruto, are you here? Iruka raised his voice, examining the handful of students who had their faces down. Outside, Anko smirked. Get ready. It's your turn. Hefting the brown ball next to her, she chucked through the window, causing its occupants to flinch, most throwing up an arm to shield them from the shards of glass. The ball bounced twice before coming to a stop in front of the teacher's desk. A muffled explosion was heard a moment later, and the ball started to leak smoke. Completely bewildered as to what the hell the thing was, Iruka jabbed the thing, causing the ball to pop open, revealing a very bedraggled boy inside. Hacking and coughing, with smoke still rising, the boy got to his feet. Quickly turning around, he grabbed a cloth and threw one end up, causing the kunai attached to stick into the ceiling. Turning around to the students, Naruto struck a pose. Alright maggots, using the term his mother had used occasionally when training, Uzumaki Naruto-sama, future Hokage, has arrived. Repeating the phrase that had been painted onto the cloth behind him. His introduction was met with complete silence, the entire class wet dropping as one, everyone thinking the same thing. He's insane. In the tree branch, Anko noted how he had trouble getting out of the ball. She filed that away for future reference. Iruka face-palmed. This is definitely Mitarashi Anko's kid. God help us all. 2 minutes later, Naruto climbed the risers intending to sit in the back with his only two friends, Nara Shikamaru and Aburame Shino, dragging the remains of the ball and banner behind him. The Nara and the Aburame clans were the only families that did not call him and his mother names, nor try to mess with them on Naruto's birthday. In fact, on several occasions, he had had his party at one or the other's places. Finding a seat, he sighed. Shikamaru looked at him. That was some introduction there, Naruto-kun. I agree. I do not anticipate anyone forgetting your name in the foreseeable future, Shino agreed. Yeah, well, it would have worked better if the ball had exploded like it was supposed to. I guess I didn't put enough black powder in. That would be the logical assumption, Shino replied, pushing his shades up his nose, a faint buzzing emanating from him. Your introduction might have had a better chance of success had you tested it out earlier. Yeah, well, it was kind of a last-minute thing. Naruto turned to look the other way when he heard a small cough. Hello. My name is Hyuga Hinata. The smoke-stained boy turned to see who had addressed him. She was about his age, with pale gray eyes and short black hair. Hey, I know you. You were the girl that was almost kidnapped a couple of years ago. Yes, that was me, she murmured. That must have been pretty scary, getting taken like that. I was very afraid for a while, but I knew that my father would come and get me. It must be nice to have a dad. All I have is my mom. Hiro Kakashi drops by every once in a while, but he is too lazy to be a dad. Hiro Kakashi? Hinata asked, barely able to repress a snort of laughter. Yeah, he is a friend of my mom's, but he is always reading these perverted books. I see. Hey, do you want to be friends? She thought about his offer for a minute. She didn't have any friends herself, but she remembered the warning her father had given her about the boy and his mother once. He was so nice though. Yeah. I would like that. Chapter 2. A not so happy birthday. October 10th, 10 years after the day of the Kyuubi. Naruto woke up gradually, the sun shining in through the window. That fact alone meant that either his mom was on a mission and she wasn't, or it was his birthday, which it was. He sighed. It wasn't that he hated his birthday, it was just that there really wasn't much to do. Anko never trained him on his birthday and he wasn't allowed to leave the house without her. They would probably go over to either the Naras or the Aburams for a birthday lunch, hang out there for a couple of hours, and then go home, where he would go to his room and play with his presents or read until bed. Rolling out of bed he took off his sleep clothes and left them on the floor, something he would never dare to do on a normal day. But there was very little that Anko would get on him for on October 10th, and he used that to his advantage. Exiting the shower 15 minutes later after a luxuriantly long soak, where he turned the water up to as hot as he could bear, he dried off and dressed in a loose blue shirt and white pants, bracers, greaves and weights, a familiar drag on his limbs. Heading downstairs he found Anko sitting at the breakfast table with a scroll unrolled before her. That was something he had always wondered about. Whenever she had spare time, she would go to the family room and read a scroll from the shelving unit behind the couch. Whenever he asked her about what she was reading, she would always put him off by saying that he would learn what was on the scrolls when he was old enough. Turning around she smiled at him, a real smile, not a masked smile, like the ones she used during training or dealing with surly shop owners. Happy birthday Naruto-kun. Thanks mom. Where are we going for my party today? The Naras or the Aburams? The Naras offered to have us over this year. Naruto smiled at the thought of spending the day at his lazy friend's house. The complex itself was actually pretty small for one of the shinobi clans, but the surrounding forest more than made up for it. When are we going to go over? Anko looked at a clock. In about an hour or so. The Shikaku said they would be ready by noon, so I figure we should give them an extra 45 minutes. Naruto grinned again at that. Shikamaru definitely favored his father more than his mother. Knowing Shikaku and Shikamaru, they would try to avoid helping preparing the house until Yoshino hunted them down and drafted them to help. So Naruto spent the next hour doing practically nothing. Anko read one of her scrolls and Naruto went back to his room. He got out his ninja tools and laid them out on his spread before him. 40 kunai, 60 shuriken, a roll of ninja wire, his bracers, greaves, and ninja mesh shirt. Drawing his weapon pouches to him, he reached under his bed and fished out his maintenance kit. Scrupulously going over each kunai and shuriken, he tested each edge, sharpening where needed and oiling each one. After his throwing weapons were done, he inspected his bracers and greaves for signs of rust and damage. Noting one or two negligible nicks, he put those aside before picking up his ninja mesh. Inspecting the shirt for rings that were starting to wear, he was jolted from his reverie by his mother's voice. "Hey brat, get down here. It's time to go. Wouldn't want to be late to your own damn party, would ya?" "Alright mom, be down in a minute." Abandoning his inspection, making a mental note to complete it later, he dressed, strapping his armor and tools on before flying down the stairs. His mother had told him that there was no such thing as being too prepared. It was not a question about whether or not one was being paranoid, but if one was being paranoid enough. Noting her son was properly armed and armored, she told him to drop a transformation on himself. Dutifully going through the appropriate hand seals, they left the house a minute later. Outside was organized chaos. There were banners everywhere of the Yondaime standing over a fox, music was blaring, people were shouting and laughing at the top of their lungs, spilling drinks over themselves and anyone immediately adjacent to them. Anko and Naruto ascended to the rooftops a moment later, avoiding the crush of humanity below them. Naruto had once asked why they never joined in the celebration, and Anko had told him that he would not enjoy it. He saw plenty of children out there running around and having fun, but there was something in her eye and her voice that made him hold his tongue. It wasn't anger or sadness precisely, but some amalgamation of anger not aimed at him, regret and sorrow. It was a look and tone that Naruto had never seen her use before and never used since. The pair arrived at the Nara complex 10 minutes later. After Anko knocked on the door, they were led inside where Naruto was subjected to a barrage of happy birthdays and hugs and kisses and pinched cheeks by the female Naras and Aburams. It seemed that the Aburam reputation of stolid aloofness only applied in public, at least for the women. Shikamaru and Shino found him in short order, handing him their presents and enjoying the uncomfortable air surrounding Naruto. Naruto was no stranger to human contact, but he had comparatively little enough of it that when he was assaulted by a continuous stream of hugs, shaken hands and squeezed shoulders, it was enough to unsettle him slightly. Soon enough everyone was ushered into the backyard where several trestle tables had been set up to accommodate everyone, as there was no way that the dining room could hold the combined numbers of the Nara and Aburam clans combined. After blowing the candles out on a cake of truly epic proportions, it was sliced and passed around, along with a dozen flavors of ramen, courtesy of Ichiraku's, Nemono, tempura and half a dozen other dishes. After the meal was the opening of presents. There wasn't a present from every single person there, but rather each individual family of each clan got something together for him. It was a tradition established on Naruto's second birthday, when Anko wasn't able to keep all the presents and had been forced to sell a few off, much to her chagrin. So now Naruto sat at the centermost table and ripped the wrapping from boxes of varying shapes and sizes. The vast majority of the presents were ninja-related, like another set of maintenance supplies which Naruto was grateful for as he had been running low on machine oil. There was the obligatory set of engraved kunai, as well as collapsible target dummy. He also received a scroll of elemental ninjutsu with a wind release and a fire release jutsu on it that Anko confiscated immediately, saying that he could have it back when he was ready to learn them. After all, a 10-year-old Naruto being able to shoot fire from his mouth was probably not a genius idea. Shikamaru predictably got him a cloud watching guide. However, his favorite present was from Shino. He had purchased a book on ninja animals, ranging from summons like toads, snakes and foxes, to ninja companions like the dogs of the Inyazukas and the Kakechu of the Aburams. When the sun started to sink towards the horizon, Anko and Naruto took their leave. The partying in the streets was still going strong, so they took to the roofs again. They arrived at the house without incident and carried all the presents in. After packing everything away, turned to his mother. "Hey mom, I think I am gonna go soak in the tub for a while. I'm kinda tired, so I think that I just want to relax for a bit." "Alright. Let me know when you are out then. I need to shower tonight also." Closing the door to his room, he turned on the faucet to the bathtub in his bathroom. Letting it run for a few minutes, he shut it off. Double-checking himself to make sure he wasn't forgetting anything, he opened the window and leaped out into the evening. Arriving at the main party area, he wandered about, keeping to the fringes, observing the celebration. There were hundreds of stalls set up, some for food, some for games and prizes, others for telling the future, the list went on and on. He went to one stall and bought himself a large cup of orange juice from a slightly inebriated stall worker. He downed the juice in a few minutes and stepped into a nearby alley to relieve himself. Before he was able to even unzip his pants, he noticed 3 figures stumbling towards him. He disregarded them, figuring that they were just some guys like him, looking for a place to relieve themselves. However, he knew something was wrong when his danger sense went off, something that all shinobi developed at some point in their lives. Unfortunately, he wasn't quick enough to react and was thinking oh crap when a bottle smashed into the back of his head, shards of glass cutting his scalp and bashing his forehead into the brick wall. Stunned, Naruto collapsed to his knees, one hand pressing against a warm brick to try to steady his whirling head. "Look what we found here," a coarse voice said. "Looks like we found ourselves some demon garbage," replied another in a similar tone. "I think the demon was attending the celebration," the first voice said again. "And we certainly can't have the fucking monster showing its face today," inserted a third man. "Well, why don't we fix the problem now?" the second voice said. Naruto realized that he was in danger and started to push himself up off the ground to flee when one of his legs was yanked from under him, depositing him on his back. Before he could react, a booted foot slammed into his left ribs, hard. He started to roll to the left to shield his torso, but another foot buried itself in his gut, causing him to curl into a ball. A fist grabbed the back of his shirt and lifted him up. He raised his head just in time to see a fist heading his way before his vision exploded into stars. Distantly he felt his nose break. Fists continued to hit him until he felt a something sharp and cold cut into his thigh. The sharp thing pulled out and cut into his other leg and his arm several times. After a bit, the pain started to blur, with each new pain quickly fading into the background of agony. Eventually, the darkness claimed him and he knew no more. Something was wrong. Anko couldn't say exactly what, something just felt wrong. Marking her place on the seal scroll she was reading, she put it to the side and went to check on Naruto. Listening at the door to his room for a moment, she heard nothing. Of course, in and of itself the silence meant nothing. She knocked on the door and said, "Naruto, how are you doing? Are you out of the bath yet?" She waited another moment, but when no reply came she knocked again. "Naruto, did you hear me? Are you still in the bath?" Still nothing. Slightly agitated now she talked to the door a third time. "I'm coming in, Naruto." Anko turned the knob and stepped into the room. Her heart stopped instantly. She could see from where she was that the tub was unoccupied from the open door and the bed was empty. Then she noticed the open window and her heart jumped into her mouth. She body flickered to her room, snatching up her kunai and shuriken pouches before returning to Naruto's room. She leaped out the window hoping against hope that Naruto just decided to sit on the roof outside. When he was not there, she started roof hopping looking for her missing son. He had obviously sneaked out to see the festival and she prayed that he was still wandering through the crowds. However, she knew that her worst fears were probably about to come true as she scented blood, her nose enhanced by channeling chakra to it. She followed the smell 3 blocks where she found a group of half a dozen men huddled around something. One of the men shifted to the side a bit and she was able to make out a bit of yellow. "Get the fuck away from my son," she screamed, kunai in either fist. The man looked up to see what appeared to be a possessed woman flying out of the sky at them. They immediately scattered, but Anko loosed her two kunai at two random men, the sharp steel lodging in their thighs. She hurried over to the fallen men and severed their hamstrings, crippling them so that they would be unable to flee. Quickly memorizing the faces, she practically fell onto Naruto in her haste. Naruto was a mess. Half his hair was missing, and both eyes were swollen closed. His face was swollen to an almost comical degree, the skin a patchwork of purpling bruises and still bleeding cuts and scrapes, all of them mercifully shallow. There was a thick layer of blood covering his chin and pooling on his neck, probably from biting his tongue. His chest was obviously deformed, and she counted 4 broken ribs at first glance. Lifting his shirt, she saw that his chest was covered in blood, most of it seeming to have come from the 2 holes that his broken ribs had made where they were poking through his skin. She saw at least half a dozen cuts across his chest and a frighteningly deep one across his stomach, as if someone had tried to eviscerate him. By the way he was breathing, she knew that his broken ribs had put pressure on his lungs and heart, more likely puncturing one or both. His left arm was broken in 3 places, bending at angles and places where it obviously shouldn't. His right arm was marginally better, only having 3 long cuts down the upper arm, from shoulder to elbow. She didn't see any obvious breaks, but did notice what appeared to be several large cigarette burns on his hand. She tore what remained of his pants off, distantly noting the slashes all across his legs, sizable patches of his skin missing, the muscle underneath, looking more like ground beef than human flesh. Gently feeling the underside of his leg, she noted in the same clinical way that his Achilles tendons had been severed, as well as the hamstrings and calves, most likely so he could not flee. Overall, there was more blood on him than skin, most of it coming from the lacerations on his scalp, the broken ribs, and the legs. Making a pair of shadow clones quickly, she directed them to find something to serve as a stretcher. They vanished down the alley and returned a minute later, carrying what appeared to be a section of a dumpster, judging from the large white do painted on one side. Not caring how the clones had obtained the length of steel, she lifted her son onto the metal, jostling him as little as possible. Directing her clones to take the makeshift stretcher up, she ran beside them, heading for the Hokage tower, praying to whatever deity that might be listening to save her son. As the conical structure came into view, Anko started to pray that Sarutobi was in his office and not down at the party, giving a speech or something. Throwing a kunai at one of the windows as she neared, she leaped through the shattered glass with her clones on her heels. The Sandaime Hokage was on his feet in a fighting stance, ready to face whatever came in through the window. Hiruzen froze when he saw 3 Ankos jump through the now open window, one carrying a section of steel with a person on it. "Go get a medic now. Naruto is hurt." Not saying a word after flicking his gaze to the stretcher and seeing the thick streams of blood dripping off, he slammed his hands together into the seal for the body flicker technique. He materialized a half-second later in the office of the head doctor, a man by the name of Yakushi Sano. The Hokage's hands crashed together again in the cross seal, and there were 6 copies behind him. All 6 clones practically flew out the door. Hokage-sama, may I? There is someone that needs urgent medical attention in my office now." Yakushi was stuck speechless. He had never heard the Hokage speak to him in such a manner and found his hands performing the seal for the body flicker technique of their own volition, teleporting to the Hokage's office. The Hokage materialized behind the doctor a quarter second later. The doctor approached the supine figure on the slab of steel in front of the desk. At first he did not recognize the person, but then he made out a whisker mark on a blood-caked cheek. The doctor's eyes narrowed and he turned to the Hokage, mouth open to speak. The Hokage preempted the man, though, saying, "I am ordering you to treat Uzumaki Naruto right now. If you don't, I will have you arrested and executed for treason tomorrow morning. The same applies if you don't put forth your fullest effort and he dies." The Hokage swept his diamond hard eyes across the 6 newly arrived doctors that his shadow clones had fetched. "What are you waiting for? Get to it now." That seemed to jerk the doctors from whatever state of mental paralysis that had come over them. Anko moved out of the way as the 7 doctors formed a ring around the unconscious boy, green glowing hands moving over his body. "Anko," Sarutobi said, putting a hand on a shoulder from behind. Anko whirled on her heel and glared at him. "I'm gonna kill them. I'm gonna fucking kill those murderous bastards. I'm gonna rip their goddamned hearts out and feed it back to them. Anko, they fucking tried to murder my son. They fucking tried to take the life of my son Sarutobi. I swear to every deity known and unknown to man that they are going to fucking pay, and pay by my hand." Anko, the look in Anko's eyes was the wrath of some kind of demon. The killing intent that the woman was radiating was nearly almost suffocating, the look in her eyes well beyond rage. Sarutobi noted the doctors grabbing hold of the metal slab Naruto was laying on and teleport away. "I know who did this too. I crippled 2 of them. They are lying in an alley 14 blocks that way," Anko growled, pointing out the shattered window. "I will have Anbu make the arrests, Anko. I want to be at the interrogations. Only as an observer though." Saratobi knew better than to refuse her outright. He figured that letting her watch Ibiki minfic the would-be murderers would do her some good. And I will be the one to execute them when they are convicted. At this the Hokage finally shook his head. That will be left to the proper person, Anko, not you. Just try and stop me, old man, she snarled. Anko, the Sandame said, stealing his voice. You will do no such thing. If you do try to, I will be forced to arrest you. Right now that is beyond the last thing that your son needs. You should go to the hospital and wait there. I will take care of the criminals. You fucking better. Because if you don't, there isn't anyone or anything on this planet that will save them, she replied coldly. With that she teleported to the hospital, the rage lingering for a few seconds. A minute later, a possessed Anko pressed though the doors clearly marked employees only stalking down the hall to the ICU. When a surprised nurse tried to tell her that she was not allowed in that area, Anko rounded on the poor woman, pressing her against the wall by her throat. Try and stop me. Holding the woman there a second longer, she released her and continued following the widely spaced blood spatters that decorated the floor. Finding the room, she stood at the door, looking in through the window. She couldn't see her son at all, the backs of the doctors blocking him. She could see half a dozen machines with all kinds of numbers and lines arrayed at one wall. Satisfied for the moment, she stepped back and sat down on the floor against the wall opposite the door. A few minutes later, several people gathered at one end of the hallway, clearly security types. After a minute of hushed conferencing, they all left, no one willing to face an enraged Anko at the moment. Honestly, Anko would have tried to eviscerate anyone who tried to tell her to leave. Fortunately, the medical staff sensed the aura of death restrained by a thread hanging around Anko and left her alone. 30 minutes later, the Hokage came through the doors down the hall. Anko flicked her gaze at him before returning to her study of the swinging doors in front of her. Naruto's assailants have been arrested. Ibiki is working on interrogating them as we speak. Her only response was to form the cross seal, and the shadow clone leaped out the nearest window, heading towards the shinobi prison where Ibiki operated out of. Have any of the doctors been out yet? Anko silent shook her head in a negative. Sighing, Hiruzen slowly bent down and sat next to her, saying nothing. So passed an hour in that manner. Anko was up on her feet the instant the door to the operating room twitched. The head doctor looked up from a clipboard in surprise at seeing Anko right outside the door rather than in the waiting room. After a moment he supposed that it really wasn't that shocking. He wouldn't have tried to remove the woman for anything in the world if he was security, he supposed. How is he? Anko asked, the velvet softness that usually masked the steel in her voice completely abandoned. He is alive. Although, given the extent of his injuries, how long is a question. Frankly, the only way he is still alive is a combination of the Kyuubi's influence and divine intervention. He has a medium-severe concussion, as well as bruising in the brain and 2 broken blood vessels. He had 5 fractures in his skull and over a dozen lacerations on his scalp. His nose, cheekbones and jaw were all broken, as well as missing 14 teeth. His throat was partially crushed. Naruto had 8 broken ribs, 2 of which punctured the skin, another 2 punctured his right lung, collapsing it, and the left atrium of his heart. There were 12 lacerations across his ribs and 1 across his stomach that punctured the abdominal wall. He had 14 fractures in his spine. His left arm was broken 3 times, once in the humerus and twice in the radius and ulna. His right arm had 3 lacerations along the humerus from the shoulder to elbow and multiple second-degree burns to his hand. Both thighs were lacerated over a dozen times and his hamstrings and Achilles tendons were severed. He lost 2.5 liters of blood. I can't say how close he was to bleeding out. He has severe bruising to multiple major organs. The only good thing right now is that none of his wounds have turned septic. Right now, I put his survival at less than 30%. If he does survive, there is going to be scarring, whatever we do. Is he conscious? Anko's voice hitched from repressed emotion. Right now he is in a coma. As such, we have no clue when or if he will awaken. If he does, he may be deaf, dumb, or crippled. His career as a ninja is most likely over. Can I see him? The doctor looked to the Hokage before nodding. Just don't touch him right now. His injuries have been repaired, but he is as fragile as glass at the moment. His regenerative capabilities have gone into overdrive and are still working. Anko nodded and brushed past the doctor. Immediately, her eyes fell on her son. He was lying on a table with a dozen electrodes attached at various points on his body, 2 IVs in his arms, a catheter snaking out from under the sheets, and an oxygen line running into his nose. The room stank to high heaven, a combination of urine, feces, and blood. The sheets under Naruto had obviously been changed after the operation, as they only showed a small smattering of blood. The floor was also remarkably clean. She didn't recall moving to his side, just that one moment she was at the door and the next she was kneeling beside his bed, arms hovering above him torn between hugging him into oblivion and heeding the doctor's instructions to not touch him. She wanted to stroke his short blonde hair, but it had been shaved off, presumably so that the doctors could heal the cuts on his head. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, eyes closed, face relaxed. Anko let her head sink into her arms and began crying for the first time in over 20 years. She ignored the nurses that were softly moving around the perimeter of the room, monitoring the monitors closely. Anko stayed there for the next 4 hours until she collapsed into insensate blackness. She was moved into the adjoining room on the Hokage's instruction. Who knew what would happen if she were to find herself more than the 20 feet that separated them already? The next morning Anko lurched into consciousness and fell off her bed, flailing while trying to disentangle herself from the sheets. Looking around hurriedly, she realized that she was in a hospital room. Jumping up she dashed out the door, looking both ways in the hallway outside, trying to get her bearings. Recognizing the hallways as the ICU, she went one door over and entered, releasing a breath when she saw her son still there. Stepping outside she shouted for a nurse. A minute later a woman in white appeared from around the corner and scurried towards the glowering Takebetsu Jounin. "How's my son doing?" "One moment, let me check his chart." She walked to the foot of the bed and lifted a clipboard with some papers out of a pocket there. She was silent for several minutes as she flipped through several pages before turning to the distraught mother. "Well, Mitarashi-san, your son is doing as well as can be expected given the trauma he has suffered, and quite a bit better than hoped it seems." She paused and turned back to the clipboard. "His bones seem to be setting nicely, and he is reacting well to the blood pills and antibiotics he was given to fight the multiple infections he got." She paused again. "He was brought in on a piece of a dumpster." "Yeah, well, I didn't have many options at the time, seeing as he was fucking dying in front of me," Anko snarled. I wasn't criticizing you, ma'am. I was just commenting on the method of delivery. It's not every day that you see something like that." "Oh," Anko replied, anger subsiding as quickly as it rose. Sorry then, I guess." "Not a problem, ma'am. I can't understand where you are coming from here, so some anger is to be expected. You might want to see the psychiatrist on staff here at some point. I know it sounds cliché, but talking about it does help. Plus it's free. Maybe later." "Keep talking," Anko said, waving an arm in Naruto's direction. "Oh, right. Well, he is reacting well with the blood pills, like I said, and he is mending quite well physically, though that probably has more to do with the Kyuubi in him than anything we have done." Anko gave the nurse a threatening glare, daring the young woman to insult Naruto in the least way. "Don't worry, I am not one who hates him for his burden. The way I see it, he is the best thing to happen to us ever. All this crap about him being the demon is ridiculous. Would a demon stand by and get itself beaten to death? I think not. But anyways, unfortunately, the lacerations aren't completely gone, although the muscle tissue is almost completely healed. With as much trauma he has been subjected to and how much repair has already been done, we don't dare use any more chakra on him for a while, for fear of chakra poisoning. He will have some scars on his right arm, his chest and stomach, but they won't be much of a problem. There will also be some pretty heavy scarring on his scalp, but we expect that his hair should grow back fully and over them. Assuming he survives, he will have a hell of a story to tell about them." She gave a dry smile at that, which was completely ignored. His brain is a different story, however. There was some significant bruising and some hemorrhaging with 2 broken vessels there. Frankly, it is a certified miracle that only 2 were damaged. His skull is repairing as well as the rest of the bones. The bad news is that there is not much increase in brain activity over the night. There is some activity in the frontal lobe which is associated with thinking, but the rest is running on what you could call emergency power. His internal organs are across the board. His heart is fluctuating, which is why we have him hooked up to a battery there, the nurse stated, pointing to a pair of wires that ran to a black box. His lungs also keep filling up with necrotic blood and we have to purge them every 2 hours or so. Naruto-san's stomach was ruptured by the cut across it and some of the gastric juices got out and damaged the liver, spleen, and right kidney. There was also a good bit of internal bleeding from both the punctured lung and heart. We got that all patched up, but he is still very touch and go. Honestly, the earliest I could imagine him waking up is probably not for another week, at least." Anko nodded numbly, staring at her child with empty eyes. Anko started when she felt pressure on her arm. She instinctively dropped her hand for a shuriken before remembering that she was unarmed. "Sorry," the nurse apologized. "You should go get something to eat. It will help. Naruto-san won't be waking up in the next couple of hours, so you might want to take the chance to go home and get a shower too. We have a dozen messenger hawks on standby and have your address in the event that something does happen." Anko nodded again. As the nurse was leaving, she turned around. "What is your name?" "I never got it." "Inoue Orihime," the busty orange-haired nurse replied. "Thank you for everything." "Not a problem at all. I'm just doing my job." With a smile she exited the room. Anko dragged a chair over to Naruto's bed and sat down, resting her elbows on the mattress. "Please come back to me, Naruto. "You are all I have left," Anko whispered to the comatose child, tears softly dripping onto the white sheets. Anko woke up several hours later, mid-afternoon, judging from the angle of sun. Rubbing her eyes to clear them of sleepies, she yawned and stretched, joints popping noisily. Looking around, she noticed that Naruto was still asleep, that nothing had changed. Damn, there went my hope that all that shit was a majorly fucked up nightmare. Sighing, she walked out the door as her stomach growled loudly. Standing outside Naruto's room, she debated what to do. She could go down to the cafeteria and get something there, but she was still in the clothes that she had rescued Naruto in and was starting to stink, Naruto's blood on her coat and skirt. Deciding that an hour or two away from her son wasn't going to change anything, she left the hospital and walked back home. As soon as she exited the building, all her hate and rage at those 6 men returned, as if the sight of the dirt road reminded her of the alley where she had nearly lost her most precious person. Soon she was stalking, radiating an intense killer intent, giving her a decent-sized bubble in the crowded streets, no one wanting to get any closer than absolutely necessary to her. Anko didn't mind at all. She got home about 15 minutes after she left the hospital. After locking the door behind her, she tore off her clothes, bundling them up and incinerating them with a minor fire release jutsu. She spent 30 minutes in the shower, cranking up the hot water to the point where it reddened her skin, scrubbing her skin raw where Naruto's blood had dried on her skin. Normally she had no problem with blood, she actually kinda liked it, but there was some psychological thing about it being her son's blood that made her feel filthy. When the water began to run cold, she exited the shower and dried off. Dressing in a spare set of clothes, she headed out for food, hunger pangs striking hard. She hadn't had anything to eat since the party the previous day. She wasn't surprised when her feet led her to Naruto's favorite ramen bar. She ducked in under the strips of cloth that provided some privacy to the patrons and sat down on the stool. There were 2 other customers there, but she ignored them. "Hello Anko-san, how are you doing today?" Anko paused to consider that question for a minute. Normally she would put on her snake grin and say everything was fine, but she was the complete and utter polar opposite of fine. "You would not believe me if I told you." "Well, tell me about it. It helps to just talk with another person sometimes." Anko looked up at Tucci with a fusion of a dozen emotions in her eyes. "Naruto almost died yesterday. He might die today. And it's all my fault." Saying that, she launched into a synopsis of the last 36 hours or so, glossing over the extent of his injuries slightly. Tucci, she noticed, had fallen on the counter to support himself and his daughter Am was on her knees a few feet behind her. "Where are the thugs that did this?" An unfamiliar growl sounded to her right. She looked over and realized that Shikamaru and Shino were sitting there. Shikamaru had the most expression on his face that she had ever seen, and Anko could almost see Shino's eye flashing from behind his shades. There was also a very noticeable buzz emanating from the 10-year-old Abiram. The Hokage himself led a squad of Anbu to arrest the 6 she trailed off, trying to find an appropriate epithet for the 6 men people, she continued, investing a whole world of hate, rage, and disgust into that one word, and handed them over to Ibiki. "I had a shadow clone watch, and it was extremely satisfying. I am sure I can get a copy of the tape if you want to see it." "Perhaps," Shino said, voice still thick with anger. "We have to do something about this," Shikamaru finally said. This was monstrous in the extreme. Even if Naruto makes a full recovery, those men have to be made an example of. "Trust me," Anko said, a truly demented smile twisting her lips, "I'm kinda hoping that they get off. That way I can take them out myself. They tried to murder my son," the mind-numbing rage rising up again at the thought, "and they will pay, no matter what." A bowl of ramen was set down hard in front of her, slopping a bit of the broth. "On the house," Tucci muttered, turning back to the kitchen. A lot of loud banging was heard a moment later. Anko slowly ate her meal, not tasting a thing. As she turned to leave the stand, Tucci called out to her. "Wait a moment and we will be out." Anko looked surprised. "What about the stand? Don't you need to keep it open?" "Anko-san, your son and our favorite customer is lying in the hospital in a coma. We won't lose the stand if we close a few hours early to visit him." Tucci and Am emerged from the side of the building, locking the door behind them. Coming out front, Tucci pulled down the security gate and locked that as well. Anko then led the 2 Ichirikas, Shikamaru and Shino, to the hospital. Anko stopped at the main desk. "What room is Uzumaki Naruto in?" A nurse behind the desk turned to a thick book and flipped to the back. "3rd floor, room 25. Please be aware that visiting hours end at 7 o'clock, the attendant recited mechanically. Anko led the group again, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator to burn off some of the nervous energy that had been building up for the past day and a half. When the group reached the 3rd floor, they counted the room numbers until they got to 25. Outside room 25 were 4 masked Anbu. Anko ignored the guards and entered the room. It was a large room for a hospital, about 15 feet across and 25 long. There was a figure in red and white robes standing at the middle of Naruto's bed. The Hokage looked over his shoulder briefly to see who had entered the room before he returned his gaze to Naruto. "Hello Anko-san," he said softly. "Afternoon Hokage-sama. I am sorry that this happened. This is all my fault. I should have done more to ensure the boy's safety, and now, because I was so arrogant, believing in the goodwill of this village, he stands on the threshold of death. Hokage-sama, that is untrue. I left him alone after I had told him not to go out and join the celebration with no reason. He is a 10-year-old child. I should have known that he would sneak out to experience the festival eventually. You are both being idiots," Shino's calm monotone said. "Realistically, the only ones who are at fault here are the men that tried to kill him and Naruto himself for breaking your rules, Mitarashi-san." Both adults turned to face the nearly emotionless bug user and offered weak smiles. "So what is going to happen to the men that did this to Naruto?" Shikamaru asked with almost as little emotion as Shino. "Well, that is a bit of a problem. As civilians they should properly be tried in a civilian court, but if that were to happen, they would get off scot-free, as there is almost no chance that the case would be tried before a judge that does not hate Naruto, if they could even find someone to prosecute. I could probably get it into the military court as Naruto is a shinobi in training, but we run into the same problem as in the civilian courts. The only jounin that I can think of that wouldn't free them based on who it was that they attack come from your two clans," the Hokage said, nodding at the two 10-year-olds. "Even if a miracle were to happen and we did get 3 jounin that would try the case impartially, I can guarantee that the Konoha Council would interfere in some manner. What if you try them as traitors, Hokage-sama? They did attack a Konoha shinobi in training, and that could be construed as trying to weaken the military, and the Hokage has the right to preside over cases of treason." The Hokage looked at the Nara with a new respect. "I hadn't thought of that. Of course I still have to make it past the council, who will try to interfere whether or not they have the jurisdiction to do so. That is a very shrewd plan there, Nara-san." "Meh, I read a lot of books when I get bored, which was most of every day," he didn't add. "Also, I would suggest investigating whether or not this was an independent attack or if it was orchestrated by someone." Shino calmly adjusted his shades as the Hokage looked at him. "What makes you think that this was not a spontaneous attack?" "There is nothing that leads me to conclude that this was pre-planned, I am just saying that it is a possibility." Ibiki found no evidence to support a conspiracy against Naruto or anything that points anywhere other than this being an isolated incident. "Nonetheless, I will tell Ibiki about your theory and have him look again. There could be something he missed the first time around because he wasn't looking for it. Thank you for considering my theory, Hokage-sama." Hiruzen turned away from Naruto and the ninjas to address the other two people in the room. "Sorry for excluding you from the conversation." "No, not at all, Hokage-sama. Working on punishing the monsters that did this is far more important than being polite to us." The elder Ichiraku told the Hokage, waving him off. "What I can't understand is how anyone could do this to Naruto. Anyone who knows him the least bit would know that he is one of the kindest people in this village. How anyone could mistake him for any kind of monster is beyond belief. As true as that is, Am-san, most people don't think, they feel, and they let the feeling, not the thinking, guide them. Emotion is simultaneously our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. But I hear that you make the best ramen in the village. Is that true?" "I wouldn't say the best, but we are good." "Well, to hear Naruto tell it, you serve nectar and ambrosia." "Well, Naruto is not entirely unbiased, you know," Tucci responded with a wry smile. "Regardless, I will have to stop by and try your beef ramen soon. It would be an honor to serve you, Hokage-sama. Not to mention the customers we would get," he laughed. "We would be absolutely swamped," Am added. "Well, there is no such thing as too much business, I suppose. As long as it doesn't come with paperwork." "That would be true, I suppose." Tucci rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Well, as much as I wish to stay, I must get back to the tower." "Thank you for coming by, Hokage-sama," Anko said somberly. "My pleasure. I will talk to the nurse at the front desk and extend the visiting hours for you and get another bed in here. I doubt you want to go home right now." "Thank you very much, Hokage-sama." "Nothing to thank me for. I am just doing the right thing. I will leave the Anbu out here. Just as a precaution. Right now we cannot be too safe. Anyways, good evening." The Hokage stepped out the door, closing it softly behind him. After the Hokage left, no one talked, everybody absorbed in their own thoughts. Anko drew up a chair beside Naruto's bed and took one of his hands in his, stroking the back of his palms, absently noting the faint rough spots where he had been burned. Tucci and Am left first, about an hour after the Hokage departed. Shino and Shikamaru stayed until shortly after 7, saying that they needed to tell their clans about what had happened. After that, Anko was alone again. She just sat there, looking at his face, memorizing it over and over again. Eventually her stomach rumbled again and she went down to the cafeteria, but she forgot what she ate as soon as she put away her tray. She went back to her son's hospital room to find that another bed had been moved into it. She pushed the bed over to Naruto and lowered the bars. She climbed into the bed and pulled the sheets over her, fully dressed, and reached out a hand to stroke Naruto's cheek. Unnoticed, tears fell from her eyes as she fell asleep. 4 days after the attack, Naruto got a visitor. Hinata had heard about his near murder through the school grapevine the day after it had happened. It had taken her 3 days to work up the nerve to visit him though. Hinata entered the Yamanaka flower shop after school. Ino was at the counter reading a magazine. "Welcome to Yamanaka Flowers. We have every flower in every shade for your every need," Ino announced mechanically. Hinata ducked down an aisle before Ino could look up. Looking at all the possibilities, Hinata wondered what she should get. She was well versed in the language of the flowers and knew all the flowers in the store. She browsed for half an hour before settling in her choices. Hinata advanced to the checkout counter. "Hello Ino-san. I would like to buy these flowers," Hinata addressed the blonde. Ino looked up from her magazine, flipping her long ponytail over her shoulder. "Hey Hinata-san. How have you been doing? Alright I suppose." She offered the bouquet to Ino. Ino took the flowers and examined them. Acacias and anemones. Acacia is for hidden love and anemones are for sickness. "Is there someone you care for in the hospital?" Hinata diverted her gaze slightly and responded. "Yes there is. I thought that I would bring some flowers to him. I read somewhere that flowers can sometimes help people heal faster." Ino held the flowers for a few seconds before a sly smile curved her lips. "These wouldn't have to do with Naruto would they?" Hinata blushed and ducked her eyes entirely. "That's what I thought. Ino-san, could I pay for the flowers please?" Ino smirked and rang the dozen flowers up. When Hinata paid for them she fled the shop, head bowed to hide her flaming cheeks. By the time she arrived at the hospital, she had gained control of her blushing, a faint rosy tinge was all that remained. She approached the help desk and demurely asked which room Naruto was in. The nurse jerked her head up and repressed a scowl at the mention of Naruto's name when she saw who was talking. Looking his name up in the directory, she muttered the room number to Hinata. Hinata thanked her and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. When she got to his room, she activated her Byakugan and looked to see if the room was occupied, ignoring the 4 Anbu that flanked the portal. Thankfully it wasn't, so she let herself in and closed the door. Hinata slowly approached the prone Naruto. She placed a bouquet in a vase and filled it with water from the sink. Finally she sat in the seat provided, next to his bed. Hinata sat silently for a few minutes just looking at him. Someone had shaved his head at one point, presumably to heal the cuts on his scalp. She could see the white lines that crisscrossed his cranium in a helter-skelter pattern. Hinata's gaze wandered down to his face, brows in a relaxed line, eyes closed, nostrils flaring with each breath, lips puckering slightly, chin thrust forward ever so slightly. Shyly, she raised a hand and placed it on the top of his head, her fingers delicately tracing the fine white scars. Next she felt the smooth skin of his forehead and lightly pressed the hair of his eyebrows into line. Daintily, she skimmed his eyelids and caressed his cheeks with her palm. Using one finger she grazed the outline of his lips. Naruto's lips parted and he exhaled a warm, wet breath, pressing his lips to her finger. She went from normal to sunset red in 0.1 second flat, retracting her hand so hard she hit herself in the chest. To make things worse she heard the doorknob rattle. The nurse's lips twisted in distaste as she saw the Kyuubi container's name on her rounds again. She entered nonetheless, as she would get in trouble if she skipped him, regardless of who he was. She looked up from the chart she was studying, noting the bouquet of flowers on the bed stand and the curtains blowing in the breeze. She frowned and slid the window closed. She was sure that the window had been closed earlier this morning and he had not had any visitors that she knew since last night. Shrugging, she forgot about it. After all, he was only the demon brat. No one would care if someone tried to finish the deed the civilians had started. On the wall below the window, Hinata clung to the sill by her fingertips. Spying a gutter one window over, she hopped the space separating the 2 windows and shimmied down the spout. At the bottom, she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Hinata had no idea why she had jumped out the window. It wasn't like she was sneaking in when he wasn't allowed to have visitors. Then there was the kiss. Logically, she knew that he was most likely just responding to physical stimulus, but she could still feel his warm lips pressing against her fingers. Leaning against the wall, she closed her eyes and cradled her hand against her chest. Someday she wanted him to do that when he was awake. Smiling faintly, she resolved that he would indeed do that one day. Her heart lighter than it had been in almost a week, she went home. Chapter 3. Recovery. Over the next 2 weeks Konohagakure resembled a kicked ant pile more than a hidden village. The news started with the Nara and Aburam clans, both saying that Naruto had been nearly murdered in a completely unprovoked attack on his person. Of course, the other 90% of Konoha nearly went to war with itself over the attack. At the center of the debate were the 6 attackers. Most were parading them as heroes trying to rid Konoha of its cancer. The other faction, mainly the Naras and Aburams, with a few smaller entities like the Ichirikus and the Urahara shop, valiantly defended Naruto. The Hokage had to watch where he stepped very carefully, lest he pushed too hard and push himself right out of the Hokage's tower. At the academy, very little got done for the first few days. Every student had a different account of what had happened, despite not one of them having better than third-hand knowledge from Shikamaru and Shino. Still, order was eventually established and life went on in the academy. Outside the academy, things were not so simple, as the Hokage was experiencing firsthand the week after the attack. Sarutobi Hiruzen resisted the urge to stroke his throbbing temples, as that would be a sign of weakness, something that he could absolutely not afford to show in front of these people. Midokado Himura and Udatane Kaharu used to be his teammates, but Shimura Danzo had always been a staunch opponent of his. "Let me handle the situation, Hokage-sama. I can easily make sure that the 6 men who attacked Uzumaki-san will never be heard from again." "No, Danzo. Right now, the last thing we need is for the criminals in question to just vanish overnight. We just have to wait for the commotion to die down before dealing with them. Waiting too long could have its own consequences, Hiruzen. I am well aware of that also, Himura. But right now, almost anything I do will worsen the situation eventually. If they go to court, they will be released, and then we will have to deal with Naruto's mother. There is no way that Anko would let an acquittal stand. The woman is deranged. She should have never been given the responsibility of caring for the child. Her son was a breath away from death, Kaharu. She is understandably upset at the moment. That is another reason why I am not releasing the 6 men. Anko might take it upon herself to avenge Naruto before they go to trial. Regardless, your stalling tactic won't last much longer." Himura reached into his robes and withdrew several papers stapled together. "Here are the petitions from the Shinobi Council, the Villagers Council, and the Merchants Alliance. Each one wants an update of the progress of the investigation into the attack. Also, the Shinobi Council wants an update on Uzumaki-san's status." Giving up on maintaining a strong facade, Hiruzen released an explosive sigh, leaning back into the overstuffed chair, reaching for his pipe and tobacco, and turning to face the large windows behind the desk. "Tell the council that Naruto is still in a coma and the rest that investigations take time. Leave the reports and go." Himura set the papers on the desk and the 3 exited the office after excusing themselves. "What would you have done, Minato-kun?" Sarutobi whispered, staring at his successor and predecessor's likeness carved in stone. "I am seriously getting too old for this shit." Anko had settled into something of a routine over the past 7 days. She would wake up in the morning at home, get a shower, dress and head over to the hospital. She would check all the monitors to make sure that everything was what was normal for Naruto at the moment and drag a chair next to the bed. Next, Anko would take out a scroll from one of her pouches and start reading to him. She vaguely recalled reading somewhere that some coma patients sometimes recalled being read to and that helped them recover. She had no idea of the validity of the claims, but she was willing to try anything to get her son back. This scroll was on how to create a seal, how to mesh the myriad symbols together and make a functioning array. After reading for a few hours, she would leave and go to Ichiraku's for lunch, where she would update AM and Tucci on Naruto's condition. After lunch she would return to the hospital to sit at his side. After the academy let out for the day, Shino and Shikamaru would come by to visit for an hour or 2 before going home. When the sun started to set, she would open the box of ramen she got from Ichiraku's and eat it. Anko would chat amiably with the nurse that was immediately in charge of Naruto, Inoue Orihime. She was a very friendly and outgoing girl, always having a smile for Anko. Anko learned to keep a sharp eye on the girl, however, as she was pretty clumsy. The first time she had tripped over one of the legs of the Eeg machine. Anko had leaped to her feet, barely catching the expensive piece of electronics before it smashed into the floor. Despite that, Orihime was the most well-intentioned person Anko knew. Anko also spent a good amount of time over at the Anbu torture and interrogation headquarters. Ibiki had been more than happy to help her work through her anger. She had watched the tapes of the interrogations of the 6 men, as well as the recollections she had from the shadow clone that had observed. Each time she saw the tapes again, she wanted to smash something, which Ibiki obliged her with. Apparently, the torture and interrogation building had a room filled with many delicate objects that she could really let loose in. When she questioned Ibiki about the room, he smiled slightly. "We find it is a good idea to have an area specially designed to let victims let off a little steam. There are a few shops in the village that donate things to us when they have surplus that they absolutely must get rid of. I figured that the stuff was probably going to be destroyed anyways, why not destroy in a constructive way? Well, I do agree that it is cathartic and makes me feel a lot better. Honestly, if it were up to me, I would put those 6 in a room, take you down to the armory, let you load up and let you loose on them. But the political atmosphere being what it is, the Hokage has to step lightly. Every once in a while, the Hokage would drop by to check up on Anko and Naruto. He almost never stayed more than an hour, claiming that he was still dealing with the council. A knock at the door interrupted her from her reverie. Anko twisted in her seat to see who was there. A man in a tactical vest was zipped up over his chest and an old scar crossed the bridge of his nose. He held a large bouquet of flowers in his hands. Hello Mitarashi-san. My name is Yumi no Ruka. I am a teacher at the academy and instruct Naruto's class. I came by to see how he was doing. I had heard he was pretty bad for a while, but he is doing better now. At any other time she would have sat back and thought about how cute he was, but now she just turned back to her son. The doctors say he was real touch and go for the first day or two, but he has been stable for a couple days now. Well, that is good. Haruka set the flowers in an empty vase in the nightstand and pulled up a chair at the foot of the bed. I am sorry for not coming sooner, but things have been really hectic out there since the attack. So I've heard. Haruka sat there silently for a few minutes. You know, if there is anyone that can pull through, Naruto is definitely the one. You say that because of the demon in him? What? No, I say that because he has not achieved his dream yet and he wouldn't let himself die before that happened. Anko chuckled once. There is that she was silent for another minute. What did Naruto do to deserve this? He has had to deal with the repercussions of having that fucking fox in him his entire life. Did you know that 9 of the 11 members of the Konoha Council voted to execute him when he was born? And when the Sandaime classified his condition as a S-class secret so that the adults wouldn't tell their children about the Kyuubi, they still managed to poison their children against him by saying that he is someone to be avoided, that he is an evil child. Did you know he has only 2 real friends? She turned to look at the Chunin with a look of utter despondence on her face. I try to give him a halfway decent birthday and he ends up in a coma. Hey, look, this is not your fault. I know for a fact that Naruto does not blame you, so neither should you. You have done a very good job of raising Naruto. In just about any other situation, he could have grown up to hate the village that despises him so. Instead you raised him to aspire to the highest post attainable, that of the Hokage's office. Trust me, you have done nothing wrong. It is the villagers who have done wrong by hating and maligning a totally innocent child. Thank you. No problem. Everyone has their moments of weakness. It only means you are human. Haruka got to his feet and put a hand on her shoulder. Naruto will pull through. I have no doubt about it. With that he exited the room, shutting the door softly behind him. The next week passed in much the same fashion as the first, with one notable exception. On the second Wednesday after the attack, the Hokage announced that the 6 men involved in the attempted murder had been convicted by way of special military tribunal. The Hokage was sitting in a seat by Naruto's bed with Anko. How is Naruto doing? About the same. The doctors say that he has gone into a persistent vegetative state. Basically he is brain dead, they say. The Hokage said nothing. The pair sat and made small talk. After a while Anko got up and walked to the door. I am going to go out for a while. I've been sitting here for the last couple of days and I need to blow some shit up. Feel free to stay as long as you want. Anko left the room and took the stairs down to the first floor. Walking down the street with her hand in her pockets, the crowd picked up on her mood parting around her, whispering behind their hands. Anko ignored them, knowing if she gave them the least bit of attention that she would probably kill someone. She stopped by the house just long enough to pick up some tools to exercise with and roof hopped to the training grounds that surrounded the village. She started off with target practice, burying the kunai halfway up the hilts. Anko worked herself to exhaustion, barely remembering to take off her shoes before collapsing into her bed. She really didn't like spending too much time at the house anymore because it was too quiet without Naruto. She woke early the next morning. It had been a particularly bad night. She had been having nightmares for years, but ever since the attack, they had been worse. Before it was usually about her master, whether seeing the experiments in his lab or the branding of the Heaven Curse seal, she usually woke from those in a cold sweat relatively quickly. These lasted most of the night and that was what made them worse. Sighing, she got out of bed and made her morning toilet. She had a bowl of cereal for breakfast and headed out to the training ground to work off some steam before going to visit the hospital. Orihime had joked that the hospital had become her home and she only visited the house. An hour into her workout session, the training ground resembled a war zone. All of the trees in a 50-yard radius had been stripped of their leaves and several had been rendered down to mulch. At one point there had been a large boulder at one end of the training ground, but that had also been destroyed. The target dummies that she had set up were missing limbs and sizable chunks of the torso. One had been cut in half. She returned home still unsatisfied, her workout leaving her with plenty of nervous energy to spare and even more tired than before. To top it off, she was now sore and grumpy. She went straight upstairs and tossed herself onto her still slightly damp sheets. Wrinkling her face in disgust, she ripped them off and chucked them in the hamper. Honestly, all she wanted was a week-long A-rank mission, something that required lots of killing. Climbing into the shower for the second time that day, and not it was barely noon, she pitied the first person to piss her off. Not that it would take anything to set her off at the moment. She just stood in the shower, in a hazy state somewhere less than consciousness, but more than sleep. She didn't know how long she stayed like that, but by the time she came to, the water was cold and she was starting to prune. Grumbling she got out, dressed in a third outfit and decided to try to get some reading done. Anko walked right by the bird sitting on the windowsill, too wrapped up in her own world to notice it, until it gave a very loud, very piercing cry. Anko froze and rotated on the spot to face the messenger bird. She saw the insignia for the Konoha hospital on the flat document case on its back. She lunged at the bird, only to have it take to the air in startlement. The hawk returned a moment later, giving Anko a look that told her what would happen if she tried to snatch it again. Moving more carefully this time, she pulled the flattened scroll out of the document case, ignoring the bird as it took to the air once again. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Anko remembered that Orihime said that they would send a messenger hawk to her house if anything were to happen to Naruto while she was away. Unconsciously holding her breath, she read the letter. Mitarashi-san, this is a notice from the Konoha General Hospital. Please come and see Dr. Yakushi Sano at your earliest convenience. She stopped reading it there, not wanting to continue in case it said that something had happened to Naruto. Dropping the letter in the middle of the room, they dashed to the door, racing to the hospital. She arrived blowing hard. Anko stumbled to the receptionist's desk, the nurses behind it had risen in alarm. She waved them off. "Where is Yakushi Sano?" she gasped. One of the nurses looked to her compatriots with a worried glance before responding. "He is with a patient at the moment. If it is urgent you see him, we can call." She trailed off as Anko was running full tilt down the hall. She took the stairs 3 at a time and skidded past the door to Naruto's room. The Anbu guards were gone, which did not bode well. Practically breaking the door down, she saw that the room was pretty full, with Dr. Yakushi, the Hokage, the 4 Anbu, Orihime, Nara Shikaku and Aburame Shibi and their sons in attendance. But what held her attention was an upright Naruto, looking worse for the wear, but alert. Silently she approached him, gaining speed as the distance closed, until she cocked back a fist and blew him from his bed. Everyone erupted at that, but she ignored them all. She hopped over the bed and bent down to pick him up by the front of his hospital dress. She then pulled him into a bear hug, squeezing him tightly. Eventually, she heard Naruto gasping, so she released him and sat back on the bed. She looked him in the eye, anger and love warring for dominance. "I swear to fucking God, Naruto, if you ever pull anything like this I will slit your throat myself." That might have been an odd way for a parent to express their happiness at the return of a child, but Anko was anything but normal. Naruto may not have understood what the hell she was talking about, but he did know that she was just showing her love in the best way she knew. "Okay, does anyone want to talk to me instead of talking over me now that mom is here?" Anko looked to the doctor in concern. He shrugged. "I figured you would want to be here for him, so I decided to wait on you. He has lost some of his short-term memory, so he remembers nothing." "Alright then. What is the last thing you remember, Naruto-kun?" "Well, the last thing is probably unwrapping Shino's present at my birthday yesterday." The temperature in the room dropped sharply at that. Naruto looked around confused. What did I say?" "Naruto," Anko said softly, "after we went home after the party, you snuck out of the house to go see the Kyuubi Day festival. When you were out, you were attacked and severely injured." "But I feel perfectly fine now," Naruto interrupted, becoming more bewildered. "There's a reason for that. I found you as the men were beating you and got you help. The thing is, you have been in a coma for the last 2 weeks." Naruto was silent for a minute, absorbing the story. Then a grin cracked his face in two. "Alright, I get it. Everyone is getting me back for pranking them, right? Naruto, look in the mirror here." Anko passed Naruto a large handheld mirror. What he saw shocked him. His head was covered in yellow bristle that was spider-webbed with white. Naruto slowly raised a hand to feel his scalp, flinching back at first when he touched one of the scars. Wherever hair grew over the scars, it was now pure snowy white, in contrast to the yellow strands on the rest of his head. Pulling his hospital gown down, he saw 2 puckered white scars on his chest, below and to the right of his left nipple, as well as a thick ropey scar across his stomach. Finally, there were 3 white lines clearly visible extending the length of his right bicep. Tentatively he touched them, as if not quite believing that they were real. "What happened to me?" Anko quietly told him how badly he had been injured in as detached and clinical way as possibly, trying to avoid going into any great detail. "I see," he whispered. "Hey old man, what about the guys who attacked me?" "Not to worry. They have been dealt with," the elderly Hokage answered. Next the Aburame clan head stepped forward. "Naruto-kun, Shikaku and I wish to tell you that while the commune has treated you reprehensibly, there were those who entreated for your convalescence." When Shikaku saw Naruto's complete lack of comprehension, he sighed and rolled his eyes. "What the smartass here means to say is while the way that the village treated you sucks, everyone here was praying for you." "Oh, well, that is very nice to know, I guess." The Hokage chucked at the boy's ill ease at being told that there were so many people who were watching over him. "Alright then. I think we have intruded here long enough." The Hokage gathered all the adults and led them out, leaving Shikamaru and Shino behind. "So how has school been while I was out?" "Things were very interesting for a few days after your attack," Shino said from behind the upturned collar of his coat. Everyone was guessing what had really happened. Of course, none of them were right. Suddenly he grinned. It should be interesting to see everyone's reaction to your scars at school though. Naruto ignored that in favor of examining his hair in the mirror. He had to admit, along with his whisker birthmarks on his cheeks, the pattern of white hair among the yellow gave him an exotic air. The door opened behind the group again, and the doctor stuck his head in. "Mitarashi-san, may I speak to you for a minute please?" Glancing back to Naruto for a second, she nodded and exited the room. The pair stood in front of the room as Yakushi spoke. "Well, Naruto seems to be as well as can be expected. His brain seems to be behaving normally, and there doesn't appear to be any lasting damage. The Kyuubi's healing factor has fixed him completely as far as we can tell. The only mental effect of the attack is his loss of short-term memory for that evening. I don't want him performing any strenuous activity for at least a week. That includes shinobi training. He isn't going to like that. I would imagine not, but I would rather him not overexert himself and injure himself before he is completely recovered. I thought you said that the Kyuubi had fixed everything." "It appears that it has, but as you can imagine we have no experience with this kind of healing. I am just being safe for now." "What about school?" "He can resume attendance when we release him, on the condition that he refrains from any physical or chakra exertion. I can speak with the academy about that. Is there anything else, any medication or foods?" "No medication. However, he will be suffering from some muscular atrophy, so when he resumes his training, he will have to work to attain his previous condition." He turned and walked away, and Anko re-entered the room. "Hey brat, ready to get out of here?" Naruto was off of the bed faster than you can say hell yeah. Anko opened the window and jumped out, landing on a roof across the street. Naruto turned back to Shikamaru and Shino. "See you tomorrow guys," he waved as he followed his mom out of the window. "I'm getting out of here before someone troublesome comes." "For once, Shikamaru, I agree." Naruto did not feel normal. Over the past 6 years, he had developed considerable physical strength and lots of stamina. So he couldn't figure out why a bit of roof hopping was tiring him out so much. He had been traveling by roof for 2 years now and could go from one side of the village to the other without losing a bit of breath, but he was barely halfway home and he was gasping like an old geezer. Anko looked around when she noticed that Naruto wasn't at her side, noticing that he had fallen behind her and slowed down to let him catch up. Naruto stopped and leaned on his knees gasping. "What's wrong with me? I feel like someone punched me in the gut and I can't get my wind back." "You have been on your ass doing nothing for 2 weeks, brat. Your muscles have deteriorated. It's called atrophy. We are going to have to work twice as hard as usual to get you back in shape." Naruto grimaced, straightening. "This sucks. Remind me to never get knocked into a coma again." Anko grinned slightly at that. Leave it to Naruto to make a joke at his own expense. Anko changed direction, unexpectedly heading away from the house. "Hey mom, where we going?" "Well, you just got out of the hospital, so I figure we are due for a little celebration." "Mom, I'm still in my hospital gown. My ass is hanging out. I can't go anywhere like this." "Well, I was thinking of going to Ichiraku's for an all-you-can-eat meal, but we can go home instead." "That's below the belt mom." Naruto was torn. All the ramen he could eat and go out practically naked, or less ramen later with more clothes. He was at the point where he was starting to take his self-image seriously, and his whole image would be ruined if he was spotted at a restaurant only little more than his birthday suit. Plus the gown had flowers on it. Pink flowers. After considering the merits of both sides, his stomach won out, overriding his inner fashionista. Ramen was ramen, even if he would look like an idiot while eating it. Anko leaned back and roared. "Oh my god Naruto-kun. You are so predictable. Shut it. Your entire diet consists of dango and sake. Watch it brat. I am the one that is going to be paying for your ramen." Naruto turned away heading to the ramen stand, the words hard ass and ramen Nazi drifting back. Scowling a moment, Anko grinned evilly. She knew the perfect way to get her hands on the ultimate blackmail. Naruto got some very strange looks when he arrived, one mother scowling impressively as she covered her daughter's eyes to keep her from seeing the blonde's muscled ass. Anko waited a few minutes until Naruto's ramen had arrived and he was slurping it up before whipping out an instant camera and snapping a shot off before he knew what had happened. When he did, his face darkened to a dangerous shade, the other diner's not so subtle snickers not helping. Trying valiantly to not collapse into a laughing fit, Anko sat down next to Naruto, avoiding an elbow, knife hand thrust and an errant heel, all delivered while eating his ramen without anyone else notice. Draping her tan trench coat over his shoulder. Naruto looked at her and gave her a very direct stare. "You do realize that child abuse is a crime?" "Aw, come on. That was just too good a chance to pass up. You would have done it to me if our roles were reversed." "Yeah, but I wouldn't have ogled your ass." "I did not ogle your ass." "Well, the girl over there had her eyes covered, I doubt her mother is interested in me at all, and those 2 guys haven't looked away from their meal the entire time we were here. It wasn't me. I wouldn't ogle my son's ass." "Whatever pervert." Watch it runt, or do you want to pay for your own noodles? Sullenly he turned back to his lunch and ignored her until they got home. Anko went up to her room and when she returned to the main floor, she could hear the distinctive sound of flesh impacting wood. Naruto was out back training. Anko shook her head. If she didn't know better, she would say that Naruto had been talking to Mido Guy or Rock Lee, but she had been scrupulous in keeping the handful of meetings between her and the green spandex-clad Jounin as short as possible when Naruto was with her, but he seemed to have contracted Guy's fanaticism for training anyways. If he ever started preaching about lapping Konoha or scaling the Hokage rock on his hands, she would have to do something, probably involving a large hammer and short-term amnesia. Regardless, she was glad to know that he took his training seriously. Shikamaru had not managed to rub his lazy-ass personality off on her son, which would have been almost as bad as Naruto emulating Guy. Anko called him after a couple of hours for dinner. He stumbled in, his shirt and pants sopping wet. Anko pinched her nose and jabbed at the ceiling when he came in range of her nose. Smiling insolently, he took his sweet time, lingering around her for a few seconds longer than necessary. Sure, it was petty, but revenge was revenge. The next day Anko woke him up by summoning a couple of snakes and wrapping him up completely. Naruto approached the academy slowly, grin on his face. He was definitely looking forward to shocking his classmates. He arrived early to set up his welcome present for Iruka. The few students that had arrived early with Naruto saw his form hunched over by the teacher's desk and his trench coat inside. Naruto would never change, they supposed. Putting the final touches on his present, Naruto left the room. He wandered about the grounds for half an hour, killing time. He wanted to arrive when the classroom was full, just as Iruka was calling the room to order. It would make his surprise all the more enjoyable. When the final bell had rung, Naruto raced back to the classroom. Striding in nonchalantly, he slowly crossed the front of the room, allowing everyone to get a good look at him. He was wearing a similar outfit to his normal attire, the only difference being instead of wearing a loose long-sleeved shirt, he was wearing a billowing blue sleeveless tunic, one that gaped in the front to show the 2 puncture scars and the slash scar on his stomach, as well as the 3 parallel scars on his right bicep. Shikamaru sighed in annoyance. Show off, he whispered to his friend as she took his seat next to the Nara. Dude, after everything I have been through, this is the least I should get. Quiet, Iruka-sensei is about to get his welcome back gift. Shikamaru put his head down in his arms. He wanted nothing to do with the eruption that was about to occur. Iruka had sat down after calling the room to order after using his trademark head-amplifying demon head jutsu. Absently Naruto made a mental note to ask Iruka to teach him that jutsu one day. Iruka tugged harder on the seemingly stuck drawer. Naruto's smile grew a little feral. With a mighty heave, Iruka finally opened the door, only to wish he hadn't. Honestly, he should have seen this coming as he fell backwards, a spring-loaded pop-up fanged snake colored in the distinctive brown and white pattern of a pit viper jumping out at him, exploding in his face, covering Iruka's face in makeup. There was a white foundation, with eyeliner, lipstick and the stuff that gave girls' cheeks that rosy hue. The effect was of a man dressing up as a geisha. Badly. Naruto fell out of his chair as the ceiling started to dance on the walls from the laughter and I'm style, but not loudly enough to drown out a very irritated Naruto. Oh, yeah, things were back to normal. Naruto was still giggling as he walked home late from school. Iruka had assigned him detention predictably, and Naruto had spent an hour scraping gum off the bottom of all the desks and tables in the school. But it had been totally worth it. Other than that, today had been better than usual, everyone clamoring for him to tell what had happened to him that fateful night 2 weeks ago. So he sat on the green lawn at lunch, consuming the delicious bento his mother had made him, showing off his scars. He figured that they should get some show after all the trouble he had gone to get them. Even Sakura-chan had paid attention to him, which he was sure to be the height of his week. Anko met the 10-year-old at the door as he entered the house. Ah, turn around, we're heading right back out. Confused, he did as he was told. Where are we going, Mom? The Hokage wants to speak to you. What about? That would be telling, although she knew exactly what it was he wished to discuss. The recent attack on Naruto had convinced the old man the necessity of revealing certain secrets to the boy. 10 minutes of roof hopping found the mother-son pair at the doors admitting entrance to the Hokage's tower. The 2 guards let them through without challenge. Naruto kept pestering her with questions as a 10-year-old was wont to do all the way up the flights of stairs to the top where the Hokage's office was. Mitarashi Anko and Uzumaki Naruto for the Hokage, Anko said as she approached the Chunin that had secretarial duty today. Again they were waved through the doors immediately. The Hokage looked up from his towering stacks of paperwork at the intrusion, eager for anything to break the mind-numbing sameness of paperwork. Ah, Anko-san, Naruto-kun, what a pleasant surprise. Aheyo grandpa. Naruto squeaked out, one hand waving a furious hello. He loved being able to visit the old man in the Hokage's tower whenever he was able. And a very good day to you also, Naruto-kun. Anko walked forward and sat down in one of the armchairs set in front of the desk for visitors. Naruto followed suit, draping his tan trench coat over the back of the chair, allowing the Hokage to see him dressed in the loose blue tunic and white pants. Sarutobi set his paperwork aside and steepled his fingers. He had been trying to think of a diplomatic way to bring up the topic of today's discussion, but had not succeeded. "Naruto-kun," he said in an unusually grave voice, "how are you feeling?" He decided to start off with something relatively neutral and then work his way up to the big stuff. "I'm okay. Sometimes my arms ache or I get a bad headache, but other than that, I feel great." "That is very good to know. There are two reasons I wanted to speak to you today. The first is an S-class secret, something that concerns you personally." Naruto scrunched his face up in confusion. Why would the Hokage know something secret about him and classify it so highly? Really? What is it? Is it a bloodline? Some super secret jutsu my mom and dad left for me? In a manner of speaking. He sighed. There really was no easy way to say this. "Naruto-kun, tell me what you know about the Yondaime and the Kyuubi." Well, the Yondaime was known as Konoha's Yellow Flash for his secret jutsu, the Flying Thunder God technique. The Kyuubi was the greatest of the tailed beasts and attacked Konoha 10 years ago when he and the Yondaime killed each other. That is very good, Naruto, but not entirely factual. Naruto was confused. What I mean to say is that the Yondaime was not able to kill the Kyuubi 10 years ago, but he was able to defeat it. He created a special seal to be used on a newborn child, one that would imprison the Kyuubi in him or her. He sat back with bated breath waiting for the boy in front of him to make the logical conclusion. But the Kyuubi was defeated on October 10th. That means that I am the Kyuubi. Hiruzen winced at the lost expression on Naruto's face. Fortunately he was spared having to explain further by Anko's intervention. Anko snatched Naruto's chin and forced him to look at her. "Naruto, do you think that I would adopt a demon, let a demon live in my house, just down the hall from where I sleep?" When Naruto didn't answer, she continued. "Naruto, the Kyuubi was an engine of hatred and destruction. It had no conscience and no sympathy for those it harmed. Are you anything like that? No, you are not. You are a kind, smiling child who doesn't know how to hate. You are my son, not the bastard demon in you." Hiruzen averted his gaze as she pulled Naruto into a hug. Anko cleared her throat a minute later, signaling that it was okay for him to look back. "Why did the Yondaime choose me to seal the bastard fox into?" "Well, there are two reasons for that, Naruto-kun. You see, only a newborn would be able to handle the stress of having a demon inserted into its body, and there were only 3 children born that day. He didn't want to force this burden on another family when he wasn't willing to do so himself. So he chose his own son to become the jailer for the Kyuubi." Naruto's eyes were as big as saucers. "That means that the Yondaime, yes, that Namikaze Minato was your biological father." Naruto slumped back in his chair, a stunned expression adorning his features. "So, what about my biological mother?" "Uzumaki Kushina and Namikaze Minato were not married. Your mother died after giving birth to you, the Yauki from the Kyuubi killed her in her weakened state. So they are both dead." He looked down, absolutely dejected. "But I do have some good news for you, Naruto-kun. Starting tomorrow I am going to start training you as my successor as Hokage." That immediately broke Naruto out of his funk. "Seriously? Does that mean that you will be teaching me all kinds of super strong jutsu?" "No, unfortunately not. Most of what I am going to be teaching you is on the administrative end of things, how to file the paperwork, read documents, assign missions, and deal with diplomats and foreign dignitaries." "Oh man, that sounds so boring though." "And it is, Naruto-kun. Being Hokage is not just about being the strongest ninja in the village. In fact, I would say that your ability as a ninja is the least important aspect of being Hokage. You will rarely get to see combat, save for the chance that Konoha itself comes under attack. Being a good judge of character, being able to tell fact from fiction, and the ability to assign missions and send ninja out when you know that not all will return are all more important. If you can't make hard decisions, then it doesn't matter how strong you are." Naruto nodded slowly, although it was clear that he understood very little of the Hokage's speech. Hiruzen sighed. "Well, come here tomorrow after school and we will talk more. But for now, I think that you should be getting home." Naruto waved a distracted goodbye and walked out the door. Anko gave the elderly Hokage a nod and followed her son out the door also. The next day a cheery Naruto appeared at the Hokage tower at 4:30, more than ready to begin his training. Hiruzen explained the first duty of the Hokage, managing paperwork. He had his Shunin secretary, Anara, divide his work into 2 piles today. One was for the Hokage, mission requests, salary increases, that kind of thing that only the Hokage could decide on. The second pile was made of less sensitive work, shinobi requesting a new hit I-8 for example. Sarutobi carefully explained what kind of requests were to be approved and what were to be vetoed. Setting Naruto in a small desk beside his, Hokage and apprentice set to work. Every once in a while the Hokage would pick up a stack of papers that Naruto had finished with and check to see how he had signed them. There were a couple of instances where a request that should have been vetoed got passed, and vice versa, and the Hokage pointed these out, along with why each should go one way or the other. Naruto picked up on the paperwork surprisingly quickly, given how low his grades in the academy were. 2 hours passed quickly, and both were leaving the tower for home. Anko greeted him by jumping him from the ceiling as he entered the house, before asking how training to be Hokage was. "Kid, I've heard Tsurutobi-sama say that paperwork is Hokage's greatest foe, so you better get used to it. How did I know you were going to have a great big laugh at my expense," he muttered, only sending Anko into greater gales. Chapter 4. Graduation. 12 years after the day of the Kyuubi. October 14th dawned bright and cheery. For once, Anko woke Naruto in a normal fashion, gently shaking his shoulder. Half an hour and 8 bowls of cereal later Naruto was ready for school. He was dressed in the same style clothes that he had gotten 6 years ago upon entering the academy. He had heard somewhere that the reason that ninjas usually wore the same outfit every day was because it was kinda like a security blanket. With how everything could change between one day and the next, some measure of sameness helped ninja cope. It rather similar to the observation that the reason why the most powerful ninjas in the village gained their eccentricities as a coping mechanism. The light blue shirt was on his torso, loose and billowing, sleeves extending to his wrists. Under the shirt he had a sleeveless ninja mesh undershirt, wrist-to-elbow bracers, and a pair of bracelets. There was a brown leather belt cinching the shirt tight across his waist, as well as holding up the loose white cargo pants he was wearing. A pair of octagonal greaves were worn over the pants, which were taped down, covering the entire shin with 3 or 4 inches of fabric extending past the bottom, covering the anklets he wore. On the back of his shirt he wore a personalized version of the Uzumaki swirl crest. The swirl itself was unchanged, but there were 9 black tail silhouettes that were wrapped around the circle. Over it all he wore a smaller version of the trench coat his mother wore, personalized crest sewn large on the back. Naruto snatched a black cloth on his dresser and tied it over his hair. He attached 2 weapon pouches to his belt and a kunai holster to the greaves under his shirt and was out the door. Several hours later, Naruto was in the classroom waiting to be called down for the final examination. His day had not been going that great. First up was a paper test, his worst enemy. Then was a taijutsu practical, which soured his mood further. Normally he had no problem in his act as the dead last of the class, but when it came around to test time, he always had to struggle not to let loose and show them his real skill. Fortunately, the last exam was a simple dust clone. He had struggled with the damn ninjutsu for years until his mother had come up with a solution. His problem was that he had an absolutely obscene amount of chakra, and because his coils were so overdeveloped, he could not muster the control required for the clone. Anko had equated to trying to attach a squirt gun to a fire hose. She had gone to the Hokage and learned the shadow clone technique and had taught it to him. Whereas he had failed to create a dust clone because no matter what he did, he overpowered the thing. The more chakra he pumped into the shadow clone technique, the better it worked. He waited anxiously as one by one the students were called into the next room. He wished Hinata, Shikamaru and Shinnok as they were called until he was the last one left. Finally when he was called he went into the next room. Iruka-sensei and Mizuki-sensei were sitting behind a table with several rows of folded hit I-8s on it. "Alright Naruto-kun. Perform the clone technique, making at least 3 clones to pass." "Sure thing Iruka-sensei." But instead of performing the 4 hand seals for the clone technique, Naruto made an unfamiliar one, looking like a modified ox seal, and grunting in concentration. There was an eruption of smoke behind him, and Iruka opened a window to clear it out, all 3 hacking and coughing the while. Behind Naruto were 30 copies, each one seated at one of the desks. As one all 31 Naruto spoke. "So do I pass Iruka-sensei?" When Iruka and Mizuki realized that the clones were not dust clones, but fully corporeal shadow clones their jaws dropped in anime fashion. Iruka sputtered incoherently for a moment before pausing to compose himself. "How is the world do you know the shadow clone technique Naruto-kun?" Well, you know how I have such trouble with dust clones. My mom figured out why. She says that I have so much chakra that I can't focus it enough to make a dust clone. So she went to the Hokage and got permission to teach me the shadow clone." Iruka and Mizuki exchanged a look. Well, you didn't perform the requested technique. I think that your obvious mastery of a much more advanced version could pass you." Iruka picked up one of the steel and cloth bands on the table. "Congratulations, Naruto-kun. You pass." Naruto reached out and took the hit I-8 from Iruka's hand. He grinned widely, trembling slightly. Leaping up into the air he thrust the hand clutching his new hit I-8 in the air and screamed "Yada!" at the top of his lungs. Bowing once to his senseis he raced outside, wanting to show off the badge of his graduation to his mother. He hurriedly tied the forehead protector around his forehead, over his head cloth, looking around when he got outside. He ignored the snorts of disgust that the adults made when they saw he had passed and mutters. All of a sudden he was thrust from his feet, something having collided with his torso, throwing him to the dirt. Seconds later, Anko had her son in a scissor hold on her back as he struggled to escape. "Arg, get off mom. You want me off you, get me off maggot," she growled. Grimacing, he twisted in a certain way, closing his eyes as he slipped down out of her grip between her legs. Grinning in victory, his smile faded to a sickly remnant as Anko drew a kunai, an unpleasant smile on her face. He could count the number of times he had seen that smile on one hand, and every time, it had ended poorly for him, thrice landing him in the hospital, despite his unusual healing factor. Slamming his hands together in the ram seal, he rapidly fled using the body flicker technique. The Anbu sitting on the roof of the Hokage tower rose to the balls of his feet when he saw two figures flitting across the roofs of Konoha. Squinting, he was able to make out their identities, and he relaxed. One did not get involved when Mitarashi Anko was celebrating with her son after all. The morning of October 15th dawned and Naruto arrived at the academy with barely restrained glee. He had finally graduated and was officially a genin. He sat down in his usual seat in the back of the class, bouncing up and down in it, trying to burn off some of the excess energy. He frowned slightly as Sakura and a girl named Ami crashing into the room, arguing who had made it in first, and then brawling over the right to sit next to the Uchiha, which rapidly involved most of the rest of the Kunoichi, with two notable exceptions. Hyuga Hinata, who quietly took her seat next to him, and the Higurashi girl, who reached up into her hair as if to pull something out to thrash the other girls with. Several minutes later the brawl continued unabated, at least until Yumi no Ruka entered. He shouted at the girls to calm down and take their seats, but he was completely ignored. Scowling, he made a trio of hand seals and performed what Naruto had termed the demon head jutsu, enlarging his head to several times its normal size and magnifying his voice to the same degree. "I said to sit down and shut up." The mob of girls froze at that, everyone staring at the normally placid Chunin. "Now that I have your attention, will you please take your seats?" He paused until they had done so. "Alright. Today is your first day as official genin of Konoha. However, you are still green rookies and have the whole of your careers as shinobi ahead of you. But the hardest part is just around the corners, so don't think you can slack off now." Picking up a clipboard, he continued. "Now we have assembled the teams, trying to balance them so that there is no one team that is too much stronger than the rest." Haruka paused again, this time when a memory of the previous night had struck him. Flashback no jutsu. There were 8 jounin, 1 takubetsu jounin and 1 chunin crammed in the Hokage's office, including Mitarashi Anko. Haruka noticed this, along with several of the other jounin. "Mitarashi-san, this is a meeting for jounin only. We are deciding the genin cell arrangements for this year's graduating class." "Yeah, I know. I'm here as a jounin sensei. No disrespect, Mitarashi-san, but you are only a takubetsu jounin. Your point?" Anko said, leering unpleasantly. One of the other jounin took mercy on the chunin instructor and whispered something in his ear. Haruka's usual smile melted into a sickly remnant. Nothing at all, Mitarashi-san. If the Hokage doesn't have a problem with it, neither do I. Good. Glad you feel that way." Ahem, the Hokage coughed, clearing his throat and garnering the attention of the room at large. "As you know, you are gathered here to be assigned your genin cells for this year's graduating class. Does anyone here wish to petition to receive the particular genin cell or student?" "I do," Kakashi spoke up from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. "I think seeing as I have the last remaining Sharingan eye in the village, I should receive Uchiha Sasuke as one of my genin." The Hokage nodded. Sarutobi Asuma raised his hand. "I would like to receive Nara Shikamaru and Akamichi Choji this year." Again the Hokage nodded. "I don't care who else I get, as long as I get Uzumaki Naruto." Several of the jounin muttered at this, drawing a sharp glare from the purple-haired woman. One man went a little too far and muttered something about traitor's whore teaching the demon brat. Anko disappeared in a flash, wrapping herself around the man, a kunai at his throat and groin. "I would watch what you say, sir. That is my son you are talking about. Anko-san, if you please." Leering dangerously, she released the man, nicking his cheek on the way and lapping the blood off her kunai. "Now, as you were saying, you want your son on your genin cell. Anko-san, you know that there are rules against parents instructing their children as genin. I don't really care. I have been training him for the last 8 years and I don't care to see his training fucked up because he has a jounin sensei who sees him as his prisoner rather than the prison." The Hokage leaned back and took a contemplative drag on his pipe. "Alright, then Anko-san. He is yours." Flashback no Jutsukai. "Alright, I am going to read off the teams now. Team 7, Haruno Sakura, Inyazuka Kiba, and Uchiha Sasuke." Naruto heard Sakura crowing, how she was destined to be with her Sasuke-kun. Team 9, Higurashi Tenten, Hyuga Hinata, and Uzumaki Naruto. This Naruto barely heard Shikamaru, Choji and Shinobi teamed together as Team 10. Naruto lowered his head into his arms in contemplation. Hyuga Hinata wasn't so bad he thought, but he really didn't know, as she was kinda weird. He had tried to befriend her when they had entered the academy together, but whenever he had tried to talk to her or hang out, she had claimed prior engagements. She sat next to him in class, but almost never spoke to him, in favor of blushing and playing with her fingers. He didn't know much about the panda-haired girl, other than she was a weapons mistress already. She had never really interacted with him, and on the few times she had, it was with none of the venom and acerbity that many of the other children displayed, so she was already better than 99% of the other children in the village in his book. Alright. You have a 1-hour break for lunch, so be back here on time to meet your senseis. Heading back an hour later, Naruto took his seat. Hey, sit down everyone, Iruka called from his position at the chalkboard. Now, allow me to introduce you to your senseis. The door to the classroom opened and 8 jounin filed in. 3 by 3, the students were led away by the adults until it came time for Team 9 to receive their jounin sensei. Naruto could detect a faint whistling that came from outside the windows and the blood drained from his face. Hinata and Tenten, who had chosen to sit up by their new teammate, noticed this and wondered what was wrong. Naruto was muttering under his breath, something to the effect of please not her, over and over. The two kunoichi exchanged a concerned look behind his head. Did Naruto know their sensei already? That question was answered a moment later as Iruka was interrupted by one of the floor-to-ceiling windows exploded in a shower of glass. She popped up and struck a pose after nailing a pennant that said Mitarashi Anko, arrived to the ceiling. Naruto's head smacked into the desk. Hey Naruto-chan, what are you doing sleeping in class? Get your mangy ass up here on the double. That goes for Higurashi Tenten and Hyuga Hinata too. Naruto sat up and answered, "Hi, mom," before descending the steps to the front of the class. Tenten and Hinata exchanged another glance, this one saying, "This crazy woman is his mother. Alright you three. I want you to meet me at training ground 19 in 10 minutes. Don't be late." With that, she formed the seal for the body flicker technique and disappeared. Naruto turned to his two teammates. "Okay, we gotta hurry. Training ground 19 is on the other side of the village. Trust me when I say you don't want mom mad at you. It gets hazardous to one's health when she is. Follow me." Hinata had been blushing furiously ever since the team assignments had been announced and personally was glad for a little more time to think of what she was going to say to Naruto when the time came. When the three of them reached the designated training ground, they found their sensei sitting in a log, swinging her legs and munching on a stick of dango. The training ground was rather cookie-cutter, similar to most of Konoha's training areas. It consisted of a large clearing, maybe 100 yards in diameter, with a medium-thick patch of forest surrounding it. There were a dozen or so stumps, varying in height from knee to shoulder height at one end with targets attached. There was also a small stream, a dozen paces across, and maybe 2 or 3 deep to the other end. Finally, there was a small rock outcropping in between the targets and the stream. Well, I bet you three had a whole shitload of questions, but those can wait for the moment. I want us to get to know each other a bit first. I'll start off. My name is Mitarashi Anko. You will refer to me as just plain Anko, and I will do the same. That applies to you too, Naruto. You aren't here to learn to be nice, so there is no use in pretending at all. I'm 30 years old and I specialize in assassination and interrogation. My favorite food is dango and green bean tea. This is the first time I accepted to teach, so it's going to be new to all of us. Okay, your turn, she said, pointing to Tenten. My name is Higurashi Tenten, I am 12 years old, a freshly graduated genin, I specialize in long-range combat, my favorite food is sesame dumplings. I help run my father's weapon shop and blacksmithy in my spare time. My name is Hyuga Hinata, Hinata whispered, poking her fingers together. I am 12 years old. I am the heiress to the Hyuga clan, and my favorite food is zenzai and cinnamon rolls. I like to make medicinal salves and press flowers as hobbies. Naruto was torn. He wanted to shout his name and his stuff, but his mom was sitting right in front of him. So he decided to keep most of his speech the same, just tone it down. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage of Konoha. My favorite food is ramen from Ichiraku's. My hobbies used to be playing pranks and causing trouble, but since I graduated I made the promise to become the greatest shinobi in all the lands, so now I'm training to reach that goal. My likes are my precious people and my mom and my dislikes are the people who treat me bad. Oh, and I am 12 years old also. Anko noticed the very different looks the two girls were giving him. Tenten glanced at him out of the corner of her eye, giving him a weary look. Hinata on the other hand peeked at him from the corners of her eyes, poking her fingers and blushing faintly. Who would have guessed that her son had a fangirl? Well, I am not very good at this teaching thing, so why don't you just ask me any questions that you have? I mean Anko, what kind of jutsu will you teach us? Naruto blurted out. That depends very much on you. We will focus on what you need to learn before what you want to learn. What I mean is there are things you have to learn before you can learn other things. But when you do get to the point when I start teaching you ninjutsu and jinjutsu, you won't be learning any big flashy jutsus. I was trained as an assassin as you know, so everything I know is pointed to doing the maximum amount of damage with the least amount of energy. Also, much of your training will be focused towards stealth and speed. I'm not saying you won't learn how to fight, like the rest of your former classmates, but that combat will be a secondary concern for you. Most of the time, if you haven't taken out your target with the first strike, you will retreat to try again. You said you specialize in assassination. Are we going to be an assassination squad? Tenten inquired. Yes, I am going to be training you as an assassin reconnaissance squad. That means that you will learn to kill a lot earlier than most of your classmates. Tenten looked slightly green at that announcement. Naruto looked queasy. Surprisingly, Hinata was the most collected about it. When will we be doing our first mission? When I think that you three are ready for it, not a second sooner. Naruto's face fell slightly at this. He was looking forward to being able to leave the village for a little bit soon. Well, enough questions for now. Anko hopped up to her feet. Okay, so before we start training, I have a test for you three. One of the things you are going to be told to do is to sneak into an enemy base and steal something. What you three are going to do is break into Sarutobi Asuma's residence in the Shinobi district and steal all his cigarettes without tripping any alarms or traps. You have 2 hours to complete your assignment. If for any reason you fail to get his smokes or trip something, you all go back to the academy. Even me? Naruto asked. Especially you brat. There is no way that you should fail this if you have been listening with even half a ear for the last 4 years to what I have been teaching you. Anyways, daylight is burning. Remember, back here in 2 hours or back to the academy you go. And before anyone had the time to open their mouths to even protest, she was gone. How the hell are we supposed to break into a Jounin's apartment and steal his cigarettes in 2 hours? Tenten asked rhetorically. Well, at least we know that he won't be home. True, she answered Naruto. But that still leaves us with the fact that it is a Jounin's apartment that we are supposed to break into. And she didn't tell us where Asuma-sensei lives either. Oh, I know where he lives. I help the Hokage with his paperwork sometimes and I have seen his address before. What? You help the Hokage with his paperwork sometimes? Tenten's tone implied more than mild disbelief. Yeah. I have been helping him out for years now. Before Tenten could reply again, Hinata broke in. Naruto-kun, Tenten-san, and Anko-sensei said that we only had 2 hours to steal Asuma-sensei's cigarettes. Should we get going? Hinata-chan is right, Naruto said. It is going to take a while to break in and we don't have a lot of time, so we should go now. Alright, then Naruto-san. Lead on. Tenten bowed, extending one hand in a slightly condescending manner. It was clear that she did not take Naruto at his word about him being the Hokage's assistant or about him knowing where Asuma lived. Hinata glared at the other girl for a moment as Naruto led the way. Naruto was a bit of a braggart, but he was not a liar, at least when it counted. Denying he had pulled a prank didn't count. The three new genin didn't speak as they transversed Konoha via rooftops. When they got within 2 blocks of where Naruto said where Asuma lived, Naruto called a halt. Pointing down and across the street, Naruto gestured to a wholly unremarkable apartment on the 3rd floor of a red-tiled, whitewashed building that could be swapped with 100 others in Konoha. Staring at the building, Naruto asked Hinata-chan, can you scan the area for anyone who shouldn't be here? Activating her bloodline, Hinata responded with a question of her own. What should I be looking for? Asuma-sensei or his team, the Hokage, any other Jounin in the building, anyone who might run us off really. There are 5 people in the building. 2 on the 1st floor in what looks like an office. Someone in a bedroom on the 2nd floor and 2 people in a hallway on the 3rd. Wait, never mind, they left. Went roof hopping. Great. Okay, I kinda know the guy and if he has his apartment trapped and it is possible that it isn't, lem go first. I know the shadow clone technique so I will let them go first just to be safe. Any questions? Being Naruto in mild disbelief, Tenten shook her head. Naruto looked at Hinata and when she didn't have anything further to add, he made the prodigious leap across the street and stalked toward Asuma's apartment. Once the trio were on the roof of the target building, Naruto created a trio of clones and let them take point. Slipping down off the roof into the complex, they navigated the hallways until they came to apartment number 384, residence of one Sarutobi Asuma. Putting a hand on Hinata's shoulder, he leaned close to whisper in her ear. See any residual chakra? No, Naruto-kun. The doorway looks clean. Nodding, he gestured for Hinata to take the lead and everyone waited for her to clear the entrance. Reaching into a pouch on her belt, she withdrew her set of thieves' tool. Going through 3 picks before she found the one that fit, she jiggled the pick and then abruptly snapped the torque wrench a quarter turn and the lock clicked open. Patting Hinata on the shoulder, he motioned for her to move aside. Complying, one of the 3 Naruto clones held the door barely ajar while clones 2 and 3 ran their palms over the frame of the door before clone 1 slowly eased it open. Before 1 had opened it more than 3 or 4 millimeters, 3 grabbed his shoulder, signaling for him to stop. Seeing a nearly invisible thread attached to the other side of the door, Clone 2 reached up and snipped the thread, while 2 kept tension on the long end. Easing the door open again, they froze once more when the door bumped into something on the inside. By now the door was open enough for one of the clones to poke his head inside. He breathed a sigh of relief when all he saw was a coat rack in the corner of the doorway. Clone 1 and 3 entered the apartment as 2 kept pulling on the thread that was attached to the door. Once the thread was slipped off the hook that was attached to a complicated lever and pulley system that would have flung a number of shuriken and kunai at them. Naruto, Tenten and Hinata waited outside until a clone came back and gave them the all clear. Closing the door behind them, Tenten gave Naruto a look. What was that about Asuma-sensei's apartment probably not being trapped? Well, I was wrong. So sue me. The bastard is almost as lazy as Shikamaru sometimes. Ho, did your clones disable so many traps so quickly, Naruto-kun? Naruto grinned. Lots and lots of practice. This seems too easy though. Your clones disabled all these traps too quickly. Tenten had risen to the balls of her feet and her gaze was darting around, expecting something to happen. Hey, give me some credit here. Why don't we just find Asuma-sensei's cigarettes and leave quickly then? Hinata suggested. Alright, my clones have cleared the entire apartment, but keep an eye out in any case. We made it in, now let us not screw this up now. Eyeing Naruto again in surprise, Tenten went down a hallway to what appeared to be a bedroom. There were no cigarettes on the wardrobe or nightstand, nor on the counter in the bathroom, so she was preparing herself to start digging through his drawers when a hushed shout from the entryway drew her attention. Unsheathing a kunai in preparation to have to fight, Tenten carefully walked back down the hallway. Her caution was unnecessary in any case. Naruto had been searching through the kitchenette attached to the living room when he had found a drawer with a half-dozen partially smoked packs. Pocketing the slightly crumpled boxes, Naruto motioned for them to move to the doorway. But when Naruto opened the door, there was someone that was not supposed to be there. He tried to give a warning, but Shikamaru had already caught him in his shadow imitation technique. Once Shikamaru had successfully captured all 3 members of Team 9, Asuma came slouching around the corner, a cigarette wobbling from the corner of his mouth. Well, what do we have here? He drawled. Nice call Asuma-sensei, Choji continued. Practically snarling, Naruto strained against Shikamaru's technique. You are never going to break my technique, Naruto-kun. You should know by now that the shadow imitation amplifies my strength 5 times over. Naruto didn't get the chance to reply because he died before he got the chance. What just happened? Shino asked in uncharacteristic confusion. Shikamaru just hung his head and let Tenten and Hinata go. You just tried to knock out a shadow clone with your bug, Shino-kun. What? A shadow clone? Yep, Tenten and Hinata replied in unison, simultaneously dropping the transformations they had on. How did you know we were here though? Clone 1 asked. Because I agreed to participate in your graduation test. Why do you think it was so easy to get in? I thought something was off about this whole thing, Clone 2 replied. Meanwhile Choji just looked confused. So do we fail Asuma-sensei? Nah, when I said for you guys to catch any intruders for your test, I never actually expected you'd be able to catch them. Oh. Well, I think this is cause for celebration. Yakitori it is then. 3 miles away, Naruto and team dropped out of the trees in front of Anko. Mission. Success, Naruto proudly proclaimed, tossing the loot to Anko. Surprise, you 3 actually passed. Well, congratulations then on officially becoming active duty shinobi of Konoha. Now get out of here you 3. We are done for the day. Be back here at 10 o'clock tomorrow. We are going to go shopping. She departed with a rather gruesome grin, vanishing in a puff of smoke. Well, she is interesting to say the least, Tenten said. How did you learn the shadow clone technique, Naruto? It is a kenjutsu, not something you can just pick up anywhere. Tenten had rounded on the dope, curious as to how the dead last had gained such a powerful ability. Hinata perked up almost immediately. She considered herself to be a Naruto expert and she was intensely eager to learn anything about him. Naruto lowered his head and told the tale of how his mother had figured out that he had too much chakra to do a dust clone, but a higher level clone would be easier for him to do. This boy was a riddle wrapped in an enigma wrapped in a mystery. And Tenten loved riddles. Hinata was smiling to herself. This was exactly why she idolized the blonde boy. He couldn't do an academy technique but then turned around and whipped out a cage level 1. His resolve and determination were his best attributes to her and his kindness and cheerfulness were only icing on the cake. It was just then that Naruto's stomach made itself known. Grinning sheepishly he said, you guys want to come get lunch with me? I'm gonna go to Ichiraku's. Hinata was ecstatic. Naruto-kun asking her out for lunch. He was asking Tenten along too, but this was more than she had ever gotten from him before. She felt the blood in her cheeks rising and nodded her assent. Naruto looked at her with a strange expression, but then looked at Tenten. I guess. We should try to get to know each other better since we are on the same genin squad. Ramen wasn't Tenten's favorite food, but she could eat it with her teammates. "Alright, follow me," Naruto said, grinning what Tenten would later dub his happy-go-stupid smile. Naruto led his two new friends across town to the ramen bar. Naruto greeted the owner with a wave. "How's business been, Tuchi-asan?" "Pretty good, Naruto-kun." Naruto seated himself at the bar, Tenten to his left and Hinata to his right. "Are you going to introduce us to these two beautiful girls you have with you?" This took both girls by surprise. Tenten had never had anyone call her beautiful, tomboy being the more usual adjective. Hinata blushed again, murmuring something unintelligible under her breath. "Oh, yeah. This is Tenten-chan and Hinata-chan. They are on my genin team." Tenten frowned briefly at Naruto. They were teammates for less than 2 hours and already she was Tenten-chan. She could understand Anko applying the suffix to her as her sensei, but the boy really didn't have any sense of propriety. Hinata giggled slightly. Naruto had called her Hinata-chan from almost day one, but it always gave her a bit of a boost when she heard it again from his lips. After Tucci and AM had introduced themselves and taken the trio's orders, AM leaned on the counter to talk to Tenten. "Don't let it bother you, Tenten-san, it's just the way he is." "Let what bother me?" "He called you Tenten-chan. It's just a part of his personality. It doesn't mean anything." Tenten accepted this, as it really did seem to fit with the blonde's personality. When the food finally arrived, Tenten was impressed. Ramen wasn't her favorite food, but she could see why Naruto loved the stuff so much. Tenten sat there in amazement after she finished her second bowl of chicken ramen, as Naruto finished his 8th bowl of miso ramen. Excusing herself after lunch was done, she went home. She had some questions for her father about her teammate. Igarashi Kaseki greeted her from behind the register as Tenten walked into the ground floor of her family's residence. It was a large 2-story structure, the smithy and shop occupying the ground floor, with the residence above that. "How are you doing, Tenten?" "I'm okay, father. I got assigned my genin cell today." "Oh, really? Who are you with?" "Mitarashi Anko, Uzumaki Naruto, and Hyuga Hinata." Her father's face darkened at the first two names. "So you have the snake woman and the brat on your team?" "Yes, father." "What wrong?" Her father didn't seem to be best pleased by her sensei and teammate. "How that woman ever got to be a jounin sensei is beyond me. And with him too. How the Hokage could have let him graduate the academy is beyond me," Kaseki growled under her breath. Father, what is wrong with Anko-sensei and Naruto-san?" "I agree that Anko-sensei is a little intimidating and Naruto-san is a moron, but they don't seem to be bad people. I can't say it straight out, but you need to be careful around your sensei and the boy. They are both incredibly dangerous people. The brat especially is someone to be wary of. He may seem nice enough, but you don't know him like I do. For that matter, same goes for your sensei. She is a good enough shinobi, I guess, but she has a dark past." Anko she could believe that about, but Naruto? He was all cheer and fluff. She couldn't imagine anything remotely dangerous about the thick-skulled blonde. What could possibly be dangerous about Naruto-san? I mean, he already knows the shadow clone technique, but other than that, his skills are surprisingly bad. Just be careful, Tenten. Just be careful. They both have some pretty dark secrets, some that would turn your hair white. Kaseki interrupted his daughter's question. "Leave it at that, daughter. Believe me, I would like to tell you, but I am restricted by the Sandame's law. Any more I cannot say." And with that, her father excused himself, telling Tenten to man the register until he got back. Not that she minded much. It would give her time to think. Hyuga Hiashi didn't react much better to the news of Hinata's teammate than Tenten's father did. Hinata had gone to her rooms immediately after entering the house, intending to work on the family ledger, as she had not attended to it since the day before yesterday. She vaguely recalled that one of the branch members told her that the pantries in one of the branch house buildings were running low. But almost before she had gotten started, a knock sounded at her door. "Enter," she replied. Hinata had expected one of the branch house servants come to tell her of some detail that required the approval of the mistress of the house, but instead she found Niji, her father's brother's son. Niji had been touted as a genius among a clan of geniuses, so she knew that it was most likely her father summoning her. "After all, you did not send the head servant to sweep stairs." "Hello, Niji-kun." "Hello, Hinata-sama. Your father requests your presence in his study at your earliest convenience." Hinata sighed. Whatever her father wished to talk about would probably not be pleasant. Her father was a master of innuendo and only used such polite language when something had gone catastrophically wrong or he was extremely angry. His anger was almost always cold, as befitting his position as the head of the first clan. After all, it would be unseemly for the shinobi second only to the Hokage to lose control of himself when angry. Either way, at her earliest convenience meant 10 minutes ago. Marking the column she was working on, she put the ledger away and stood up, gesturing for Niji to lead the way. She knew the way to her father's study all too well, but the heiress to the clan went nowhere unaccompanied, even when she was a failure and an embarrassment to the name. When they arrived, Niji knelt and announced her presence to Hiashi. He bid her enter and she did, folding her legs under her on the mat before his desk. Hiashi ignored her in favor of the letter he was working on until he finished it, rolling it up and handing the scroll to one of the omnipresent branch house members at hand. He dismissed the attendants with a wave of his hand. Once the room had emptied, he addressed his daughter. "Tell me, daughter, who was assigned to your genin cell today?" "Mitarashi Anko, Uzumaki Naruto and Higurashi Tenten." Hiashi scowled. "So you have been put under Orochimaru's former apprentice and put on the same genin cell as the demon brat. You are a disgrace to the clan, but even you deserve better. I shall have to speak with the Hokage tomorrow about rearranging the genin cells." Hinata lowered her gaze to the ground, letting her bangs hang to obscure her blush. Actually father, I am as satisfied with my genin cell. Anko-sensei seems to be a capable kunoichi, and Tenten-san and Naruto-san are nice people. Hinata may be shy, but she was not stupid. Who knew what her father might do were he to learn that she believed herself to be in love with her blonde teammate. Hiashi remained silent for several seconds, examining his unfortunate daughter. There was something more here, something other than mere approval of her sensei and teammates. But he was damned if he could figure it out. It was times like this that he missed his dead wife the most. She would probably know exactly what was going on with his firstborn and how to solve it. Well, if she was truly content with her team, he might as well leave her there. Well, if that is what you want. But let me warn you. Be wary of your sensei, Hinata-chan. Her first master was Orochimaru, so who knows where her loyalties truly lie. But be warier of your teammate, the Uzumaki brat. He is even more dangerous than Mitarashi-san. Do not get too attached to either one, for it will only end badly. He then dismissed her, returning to his paperwork. Hinata left her father's study deep in thought. She knew that her sensei was not well liked among the civilian population. She wasn't so sure about the shinobi half, as most were more than a little scared of the purple-haired jounin, as she was known to be more than a little bloodthirsty. In fact, most people thought she would become the next head of Anbu's torture and interrogation section. Naruto, of course, she knew quite well, having been stalking the kid for years. Unfortunately, her father's warning towards the blonde was all too typical of the adults of the village. She had gone to the shinobi archives last year in an attempt to ascertain exactly why he was so hated. But other than finding out his birthday, October 10, there was nothing about him in the archive. Pulling out the ledger she had been working on earlier before she was interrupted by her cousin, she went back to work. The next morning found all three genin at the designated training ground at 10 o'clock on the dot. Anko was already there, opening a box of dango. "Good morning," grinning brilliantly. "Today we are going to go shopping for you," she said, pointing at Tenten and Hinata. Tenten and Hinata looked at each other. "Why do we need to go shopping for Hinata-san and myself for?" "Why for clothes of course." That confused the two kunoichi. Why did they need new clothes? Tenten thought her clothes were fine. She opened his mouth to ask, but thought better of it when she saw her sensei smile. She swallowed the words and smiled hesitantly. "But then," Anko exclaimed. "Off we go." Tenten was starting to have serious doubts about the sanity of their jounin sensei. She seemed to slip from a very Naruto-like happy-go-lucky to happy-go-die at the drop of a hat. At the very least, she was probably bipolar. Soon enough, Anko spotted the shop she was looking for and led them inside. Turning to the Tenten she said, "We are going to buy you some dark shirts here. That Chinese thing you got on is pretty, but rather impractical for two reasons. 1, it doesn't blend into the background very well, and 2, you seem to like to use sealed weapons, and it doesn't have many pockets." Tenten thought about that for a minute. "I guess I can see your point. Just as long as I don't get anything like that," she said, gesturing to Anko's top. "Really? I find it very comfortable." Naruto sighed and rolled his eyes. "Yeah, we all know that, Mom. But then again, most girls have something called shame. Frankly, I am surprised that you have never been hauled off for public indecency." "Oh really?" she replied. In a flash she had Naruto in a submission hold, face pressed into her midriff, arms twisted into what appeared to be an uncomfortable tangle. Naruto tried to say something, but it came out mostly as raspberries, which set Anko off into a giggling fit. Once Naruto was released, he crossed his arms over his chest and scowled at his mother. Looking to the teenage girls he sighed. "Look, why don't you two go pick yourselves out some clothes? She is going to be out of it for a while. Mom really won't care what they look like as long as they are dark." Looking at Hinata he said, "Go pick out a dark jacket or something, and I am sure that will satisfy her." While Tenten and Hinata were shopping and Anko was being herself, Naruto wandered around the store, looking at all the different clothes. He was in the footwear section when he spotted something unusual. It was a pair of wooden sandals, but with 2 pieces of wood attached to the underside, so that the wooden soles were 2 or 3 inches above the ground. Sitting down on a bench, Naruto removed his blue shinobi sandals and put the new ones on. Walking back towards his teammates, he noted that the wooden sandals made a soft clacking noise as he walked. "Hey Mom, what are these things called?" Naruto asked as he got back to the dressing area, lifting one foot sideways and pointing at the sole. Anko, Tenten and Hinata turned to see what he was talking about. Those are called Jetta, Naruto-kun. Cool. I was thinking of getting some. I thought that I could bolt some metal onto the bottom of them so that when I kick, it'll hurt a lot more than normal. And the fact that those Jetta don't make you the shortest person on the squad has nothing to do with it either. Naruto's face flushed red and he started shouting at Anko that that wasn't the reason he wanted them. Hinata blushed at his denial and Tenten giggled a bit. Typical Naruto. When Naruto turned away, Tenten showed Anko what she had chosen. She had 4 shirts, all in a dark red, with the front lined with pockets for scrolls. Hinata had found a bulky black jacket similar to the one she was already wearing. As they exited the store after Anko paid for their purchases, Naruto turned to Anko. Hey mom, do you know of any place where I could get my Jetta modified? I don't know. One of the blacksmiths around here might do it for you, I suppose. Naruto-san, my father runs a weapons shop and blacksmithy. We could go there and I am sure that he could do that for you. Alright. Hey mom, let's go now. Anko rolled her eyes and sighed, motioning for Tenten to lead the way. She did so, and 10 minutes later they approached a modest 2-story building in the shinobi district of Konoha. Neither of her parents were shinobi, Tenten explained, but her grandfather and great-grandfather had been, so her father had inherited the house in the shinobi district, along with the business. Tenten opened the door to the shop and hoped that her father wasn't manning the register right now. Fortunately, her mother, Chichi, had arrived home the previous day after inspecting some of the iron mines that supplied their store with iron and coal. Chichi was an older version of Tenten it seemed. The elder Higurashi woman wore her hair in the same style as her daughter and had on a similar Chinese-style shirt. When she saw who had entered the store, she smiled brightly and came to greet her daughter and her team. After introductions were out of the way, Chichi moved them to a back room and seated them all on couches. It is very nice to meet you all, Chichi said, and she really seemed to mean it, much to the surprise of Naruto and Anko. Seeing the looks on their faces, Chichi explained. I am not a Konoha native, you see. I was raised in a small mining town to the north. I met my husband Kaseki when he was on inspection one time. We eventually fell in love and I moved here. I am not one to hold the actions of a teacher or a parent against someone, unlike most of the village it seems. Tenten and Hinata looked from Chichi to Naruto and Anko at this. Both knew that the other 2 members of their team were not well liked, but neither knew the reason. Well, you did not come here to hear about my life. What is it I can do for you today? I was wondering if you could modify my Jetta here. He reached into his backpack and withdrew his 3 pairs of Jetta. I want a thin sheet of metal attached to the bottom here so that when I kick people, I can do more damage than normal, Naruto explained. I see. Well, I think that can be done. She took the proffered footwear and taped a note to them, then putting the wooden sandals on a shelf with other items to be customized. I'll get my husband to modify them tonight for free because you are a teammate of my daughter. She can bring them to you tomorrow. Ah, thanks Higurashi-san. No problem. Feel free to come by any time you need shinobi equipment. Sure thing Higurashi-san. Naruto was surprised by Tenten's mother's offer for him to come by her shop. Thank you for speaking with us Higurashi-san, Anko said, but we must be going. We are already behind on training as it is, so they will have to work twice as hard today to make it up. All 3 Genin's faces drained of blood at that, fearing to think what Anko could think up. Chichi smiled and waved goodbye, wondering how hard her daughter's sensei would push them today. Anko-san certainly seemed like a hard taskmistress if the reaction given by the 3 teens were anything to go by. Chichi went back to the counter and her magazine. She would just have to go all out on dinner to make it up to her daughter. Back at training ground 19, Anko turned to Tenten. Alright Brad, you need some serious work. You are a long-range weapon specialist, there is nothing wrong with that. However, just because you prefer to fight at a distance doesn't mean that you should neglect your close combat skills. So what we are going to be doing is working on you hand-to-hand combat. Anko then turned to the other Kunoichi. Hinata, your greatest weakness is your lack of self-confidence. You seem to believe that you are a terrible shinobi, which is definitely something you are not. Compared to most of your family you probably are a bit subpar, but compared to the shinobi population in general, you are definitely above average. Just because you don't measure up to your father's ridiculous standards doesn't mean you are totally worthless. Stepping back and turning her students to face one another she continued. I want you 2 to spar. Tenten, all your ranged scrolls are off limits. This is to work on your weaknesses, not your strengths. Well your hand-to-hand skills are okay is not enough. If you were ever to face off against a wind element user, you would be in some dire straits. You cannot always count on your fights playing to your strengths, so it is important to work on your weaknesses even more than your strengths. Hinata, you are always afraid of harming your teammates with your Jayuken. Well it is understandable to a degree, not going full out on your sparring partner hurts them also. If you hold back on their part, how are they ever going to improve themselves? Truthfully, you really aren't shinobi material. You are too kind and gentle to really be a decent shinobi easily. That does not mean that you never will be a good shinobi, just that you have to work harder to kill your heart. If you hesitate in battle, you will get yourself killed and worse your teammates. Every time you fight, you have to imagine that your sparring partner is the enemy, because that is what they are. Pausing for a moment, Anko considered what to say next. She bent down and whispered in her ear, "Fight, as if Tenten were trying to steal Naruto from you." Anko grinned as Hinata's took a tomato hue, expression hardening and activated her Byakugan, settling into a Gyuukin stance. The pair of Kunoichi were fairly predictable. It was plenty clear that Tenten was itching to jump back and unleash one of her manifold ranged scrolls on the other girl, but Anko's restriction was clear in her mind. From the get-go, Tenten was forced onto the defensive, taken aback by the uncharacteristic fierceness of Hinata's attack. Tenten warded a palm strike away from her torso with a forearm and drew both her fists back and thrust them forward in a double hammer blow. The retaliatory strike caught Hinata off guard, causing her to break her attack routine and stumble back several steps, trying to gain the breath that the unexpected blow had forced from her lungs. Tenten backpedaled rapidly, gaining some breathing space. She wondered what Anko had told the other girl to evoke such a response. Whatever it was effective, having completely removed any trace of Hinata's usual hesitancy. Settling into an aggressive attack stance, Tenten leaped at Hinata, raising one hand and dropping an elbow on Hinata's raised guard. She then launched a straight fist directly at Hinata's face, which Hinata evaded by bending backwards at an almost unbelievable angle. Hinata immediately tapped her hand 3 times on Tenten's overextended arm, closing off the tenketsu there. Tenten immediately retracted her fist and scowled. Having her tenketsu sealed really wasn't much of an impediment, as this was a pure taijutsu match, but it did sting a bit. The two combatants separated and circled one another, searching for an opening. When it became obvious that Hinata wasn't going to offer an opening to her, Tenten decided to make her own. Tenten launched a high kick at Hinata's head, only to have it blocked by her forearm. Hinata rushed in as Tenten's leg rebounded and tapped a point on Tenten's other leg. A moment later, the traitorous appendage gave out on her. She collapsed in a heap and scowled at Hinata. Anko stepped in and ended the spar, granting Hinata the win. Blushing, Hinata bent down to offer the brunette girl a hand to help her up. Considering the hand a moment, Tenten sighed and accepted her hand. Hinata bent and tapped another point on her leg, and then Tenten was able to regain use of it. "Sorry, Tenten-san." What do you mean sorry? You won fair and square. There is nothing for you to apologize about. This just means that I will have to work harder so that next time I can last a bit longer." The rosy hue in Hinata's cheeks increased and she ducked her head. "Well done you two," Anko interrupted. "You both did pretty good. Tenten, now you see why you can't just rely on your ranged skills to attack with, and Hinata, you aren't totally worthless after all. Alright you two, we are done for the day. Be at the training ground tomorrow at 10. Brat," she said, directing the last at Naruto, "we need to have a talk." Hinata and Tenten exchanged a look but didn't dare question Anko right then. Back at the training grounds, Anko spoke. "Alright. So we are going to be doing a review of the basics of the snake fist. It was developed by my former sensei, Orochimaru. Now that you are on a genin team, you will have to be more careful than ever when training outside of the house." Climbing onto one of the stumps, Anko continued. "Okay, remember that the snake fist is all about misdirection and speed. With the snake fist, you strike with your whole body, using your legs and torso to power your strikes. The snake fist relies on precision strikes to the weak areas of the body, such as the heart, solar plexus, throat, temples, groin, and joints." Naruto got up on another stump at the other end at Anko's instruction. "Alright brat, we are going to go through the katas starting with the basics first." Anko struck at Naruto with a wide looping attack, explaining the method behind it at the same time. 1. Spread your legs wide to provide a large base. 2. 1. You attack the weakest parts of the body, such as the neck, stomach and groin, and go for major vein and arteries like the jugular vein and femoral artery. 2nd, you make large motions with your limbs to build up a bit of momentum. Raising the arm with the kunai clutched in it, she continued. "Don't ever stop the motion of your arm when you are attacking until you hit your target." Anko proceeded to sling her arm about slowly, keeping the motion smooth, circular and flowing. "Generally speaking, you will be attacking high or low, avoiding the target center of mass, so you want to keep your kunai in line with the direction your arm is moving. Even when attacking the heart or lungs, you don't try to strike straight in, but come in at an angle." Stepping closer, she demonstrated and further explained the concept. "If you attack straight on, first of all, you will most likely end up stopping the flowing motion we are aiming for, in favor of pulling your arm back to chamber the strike." She thrust her kunai forward, stopping it just as she touched the cloth of his shirt. "Now, while you could slip your kunai in between the ribs and successfully strike your target, you are just as likely to hit a rib. Now if you use those circular motions we were talking about you would either come down through the throat or come up under the ribs. Either way, the wounds are going to be bigger and harder to heal, assuming they aren't fatal. So the next 2 hours were spent with Naruto stabbing the same stump over and over again. The next 2 months were absolutely brutal to Naruto. Every day Anko got him up at 7 in the morning by chucking kunai at various tender parts of his body and dragged him down to training field 19 to work on taijutsu for 2 hours after his warm-up calisthenics, consisting mostly of laps around Konoha and his vertical push-ups. Then, she would take him out to breakfast and be back to meet Tenten and Hinata at 10. During their team meetings, they trained non-stop. Naruto she set to doing various chakra control exercises while setting Hinata and Tenten to stamina increasing exercises for 2 hours each. Then they would break for lunch and go back for more training. Early on in their training Anko had gotten her hands on some special paper. She said that when someone channeled their chakra into it, the paper would show that person's elemental affinity. When she handed one slip to Naruto, the paper split in half. She frowned at that and handed 2 other sheets to Tenten and Hinata. Tenten's dusted and Hinata's crumpled. Okay Anko, wanna explain what is wrong? Naruto was still holding the halved pieces of paper. Nothing is wrong, it's just that you have the rarest affinities in Konoha. The cut means you have wind affinity. You, she said looking at Tenten, have earth affinity and Hinata has lightning. Naruto was grinning to kill upon learning he had a rare affinity. After lunch they would go back to the training grounds and work on chakra control and whatever random topic Anko had selected for that day. Anko taught all 3 the tree walking and the water walking exercises a few days after graduation. After seeing that Tenten and Hinata easily grasped the skill, she set them to lying down on the water, which both increased the difficulty and increased the speed at which they exhausted themselves, which in turn gradually enlarged their chakra coils. Naruto took several days longer to master it and during that time, displayed just how incredibly huge his chakra pools were. Hinata examined him with her Byakugan once, on Anko's insistence. Normally, a person's chakra coils were finger-thick strings weaving around the organs and bones. Naruto's coils were several times thicker than a normal person's. Hinata compared it to yarn versus rope. Naruto spent every day for a week at the hot springs, all day long, hours after Tenten and Hinata and even Anko had dragged themselves away in exhaustion. In the 2-month training period, Anko never saw him suffer from chakra depletion in the slightest, something that irritated Tenten and made Hinata blush all the brighter. Nevertheless, when Naruto mastered water walking, Anko had him pluck leaves with his chakra and float them over various body parts, increasing the number of leaves as he got better. They started off with a leaf on the forehead and ended up with several on the neck, shoulders, elbows, wrists, hips, knees and ankles. The exercises that Anko set the pair of girls to were far worse than the chakra control exercises that Naruto performed. Their exercises ranged from push-ups, with Anko sitting on their backs, to sitting on the underside of a tree branch for a whole afternoon, channeling chakra to their arms and legs to prevent all the blood from rushing to their heads. The 3 women just got used to the idea that no matter what they did, Naruto never seemed to run out of chakra, to the point that he was able to sit on the underside of the tree branch for over an hour longer than they had, until he got bored. In the afternoons in which Anko had them spar, Hinata and Tenten would switch off against Naruto, the other taking over when the first became too tired. Naruto wasn't a terribly great person to practice with, as his taijutsu still sucked, but he was perfect to practice on. Naruto could take a truly mind-boggling amount of damage before requiring a breather, often able to go half a dozen rounds with each of his teammates and back up 10 or 15 minutes before anyone else. In the afternoons, Anko taught them many things, beginning with weapons. Anko had the 3 of them throw 10 shuriken and 10 kunai at a target stump. Predictably, Tenten nailed all 20, Hinata got 18, and Naruto got 8. So Anko kept him behind and worked with him on his accuracy. Next, she tested them on their skill with hand-to-hand weapons combat. Basically, she taught them a modified Kenjutsu style, changed to allow for the fact that the weapons being used were 10 inches instead of 3 to 4 feet. Most of what the academy taught boiled down to how to block an attack and how to either force an opponent to range or set up for a taijutsu battle. Basically, there was virtually zero instruction on knife fighting, something Anko soon corrected. Knife fighting was quite a bit different from any other armed fighting. With a sword or long melee weapon, there were a lot of long strokes to take advantage of the long cutting edge of the weapon. But a knife had a cutting edge of only 6 or 8 inches, so most of the strikes were short and brutal, designed to put an enemy down for the count as quickly as possible. Also, there were a lot of stabs and hooking cuts, something that was somewhat risky with a longer blade as it could get caught in the enemy's corpse by sticking in bone or something. Much to Naruto's dismay, they didn't learn a single jutsu the entire 2 months they spent training. Instead, the time was spent on learning the assassin's weapons, mainly senbon and poisons, something that Hinata had a little experience with, given her hobby. Throwing a senbon, Naruto learned, was absolutely nothing like throwing a kunai or shuriken. With a kunai or shuriken, all the power came from the wrist. If you threw a senbon with a wrist, all it would do is go tumbling end over end and you would never see it again. The trick to throwing a senbon was to draw the power from the elbow and shoulder so that it did not spin at all. Finally, she introduced them to poisons. Anko took the trio to her and Naruto's house. It was a medium-sized building with a kitchenette attached to the dining room, a living room, foyer, 2 bedrooms and 2 baths. The house was decorated with bright and cheery colors, mostly pastel greens, yellows and blues. The wallpaper was flowery and scented candles burned on the coffee table. There were half a dozen porcelain plates hung above the oven, depicting beautiful landscapes. However, the main attraction was behind the house and a surprisingly large garden. Anko introduced them to their first 3 poisons. The first poison was that of the yew shrub, the seed of which she claimed to have enough poison to stop a horse's heart. The second was strychnine, from the seed of the orange fruit of the strychnine, causing intense pain, instantaneous rigor mortis, convulsions and asphyxiation in the space of just a very few short minutes, she said with a death's head grin. Finally, was cyanide, traces of which were found in the almond nut. Tenten and Hinata left Anko's house that day with a much better appreciation of the food that they ate. They also learned the antidotes for all 3 poisons and carried a small vial of each in their emergency first aid packs, as Anko was absolute rubbish with medical jutsu. What if Naruto has shinigami powers sealed inside? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.